Well, the Democrats don't want to do debates. I know Marianne Williamson and RFK Jr. want to debate. What do you think about that?
Well, I understand why he doesn't want to do it. I mean, I truly understand why he doesn't want to do it. But they are, there's a big difference. Although, in the case of RFK, I've seen polls where he's at 20%. That's not bad. But I understand why he doesn't want to do that. Look, when you're running for office and you have, in his case, let's say he has a 30 or 40-point lead, why would he do it? Now, people are going to say, well, he can't do it. I actually think he can't do it, if you want to know the truth. I don't think he's capable of doing it. But why would he do it? Especially because of that. Why would he do it? If he's got a 30 or 40-point lead, which is what he's got, I mean, I don't think RFK expects that he's going to be debating. He's a very smart guy, by the way. I don't think he expects to be debating Biden.
You've spent time with him, RFK. Tell me about him.
I have.
Is he a formidable competitor?
He's a very smart person, yeah. I know a lot of the members of that family, and, he's a very smart guy. And he's hit a little bit of a nerve. I think he really has. And a lot of Democrats I know want to vote for him. But again, if he's at 20% and if Biden has a big lead, number one, Biden can't debate him because he's not capable. And number two, why would he debate him? For that reason, but also, why would he debate him if he's probably got it locked up? I don't see RFK Jr., I don't see him getting the nomination under any circumstances.
How do you feel about potentially running alongside Donald Trump?
I want to run against Trump, and I can run against Trump better than anybody else can.
Do you think you could win?
I know I can win because I can hold it, because I get, I get many of the same supporters. I will take support from President Trump. No other Democrat can do that. My supporters are probably equally Republican and Democrat at this point. And I get more independent voters than anybody. And I can confront President Trump with the lockdowns, which no Democrat can. Lockdowns, he closed 3.3 million businesses. He closed 41% of the black-owned businesses in our country would never reopen again. This is a war on the poor. It was a war on minorities. It was the destruction of the middle class.
Bobby Kennedy, he's a Democrat from the first family, they used to call it, and he's taking almost as much heat as you are from fake news. What would you tell Bobby Kennedy?
Just hang in. I mean, they go after. He's been very nice to me. I've actually had a very nice relationship with him over the years. He's a very smart guy and a good guy. He said Trump's the greatest debater, and you can't just not debating going against Trump. I was very honored by the fact that he said that. I'm glad he feels that. But he's a very good man, and his heart is in the right place, and he's doing really well. I suppose he's at 22. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Doing very well.
So have you talked to him lately?
No, I haven't. I would, but I haven't. Okay. There's a lot of things. He's a common sense guy, and so am I. So whether you're conservative or liberal, common sense is common sense. And a lot of what I run on is common sense. We need a wall, and we built most of it, but they didn't want to finish up the extra area. I wanted to do more. After we got it built, I wanted to do more. But without that, we had the best numbers in the border, as you know, because you've said it many times. We had the best numbers in history. Yeah. And now we have the worst numbers, I think, of any country ever in the world. Okay.
Well,
no country would allow this.
Mr. President, I know you got to run, so we welcome you back to New Hampshire and New England tomorrow, and look forward to seeing you again. And and you're welcome on the show anytime you want.
And people have said to me, "Why don't you run as an independent?" And I say, because I'm a Democrat. This is who I am. This is my identity. But I want my party back. I want my party to be the party that I grew up in, the party of John Kennedy, the party of Robert Kennedy, the party of FDR, and Harry Truman.
You say that you're a Democrat, but you're getting a lot of support from a lot of leading voices on the right, like Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones, former President Donald Trump. Many Democrats fear that you're a spoiler in the race, that you will damage President Biden in the primary and grease the skids for former President Trump to return to the Oval Office. This week, former President Trump said about you, Kennedy is smart and he's a common sense guy. What kind of man do you think Donald Trump is?
Well, here's what I'm not going to do in this race. I'm not going to attack other people personally. I don't think it's good for our country. And I think, what I'm trying to do in this race is bring people together, is to try to bridge the divide between Americans. My father was able to harness these populist energies. In the last day of his life, he won the most rural state in this country, South Dakota, and the most urban. He was able to bridge the divide among people who would otherwise be Republican, but wanted somebody who was common sense, who was able to appeal to their idealism, who was able to find the hero in each of them, who was able to get them to transcend narrow self-interest and see themselves as part of a community and part of this, incredible American adventure in modeling self-governance for the rest of the world. And so I'm proud that President Trump likes me, even though I don't agree with him on most of his issues. Because I don't want to alienate people. I want to bring people together. I'm proud that all these people like me and that I have independent supporters and Democratic supporters and that I'm able to bring a lot of people. Every Democrat says, I want to end the polarization. But how do you do that without talking to people who don't agree with you? How do you do that without appealing to people? My purpose is to find the issues, the values that we have in common, rather than, focus on the issues and the personalities that keep us all apart.
As a lifelong Democrat, as you just said very passionately, will you pledge to support whoever the Democratic nominee is, whoever it is, whether it's you, whether it's President Biden?
Oh, of course I'm not going to do that. I'm not
going to do that.
No, of course I'm not.
So
Listen,
if you don't get the nomination, you won't support President Biden?
I don't know what I'll do. Let's see let's see what happens in this campaign. Let's see, if people are living up to democratic values and having debates and having discussions and, talking to each other, but I'm not going to buy.
And if you feel that's not happening, would you then support a Republican or run as an independent?
You know what? My plan is to win this election, and I don't have a plan B.
Okay.
You're a lifelong Democrat, and yet so many Republicans are supporting you. And I'm sure when you gave that number about how much money you've gotten in campaign contributions, a lot of it is coming from Republicans. They're interested in you advancing to a debate with Joe Biden, which doesn't look like it's going to happen.
I mean, we're going to try to get the president to debate. We think it's really important. And it's important for I think the Democratic Party, because ultimately the president is going to have to debate a Republican, and the Republican likely, we don't know, but is going to be Trump. Trump is probably the most successful debater in this country since Lincoln Douglas. The way that he dispatched 16 Republican opponents, one after the other, during, in 2016 was really quite extraordinary. And he has his own technique that people like. And it's like going to a prize fight, and you need practice.
Sure.
And that usually happens during the primary. And asking, the president not to debate during the primary is like asking a prize fighter to practice for his big bout by sitting on a couch and eating Chick-fil-A.
It's interesting that you're saying that and praising him, because you normally don't hear that from a candidate who could potentially run against him. Are you learning? Did you learn through this campaign what your father taught you, what your uncle taught you, what Donald Trump has taught you?
Well, about what?
Just about how to run a campaign.
Well, I've got I have a very good staff at running this campaign. You met Dennis Kucinich, who's my campaign manager, and he's running 42 campaigns.
Former Fox News contributor.
He's nodding his head. Yes, he's doing a good job. Right off camera there.
I have never seen spirit like there is right now. Even coming down here, just the people on the road that are just absolutely going crazy. And the reason is, I think they like me, and I know they love my policies. I hope they like me too. A lot of people say they don't like me, but they like my policies. I think they like me. But I have never seen spirit like it is right now. And the reason is because crooked Joe Biden is so bad. He's the worst president in the history of our country. I don't think he's going to make it to the gate, but, you never know. But Joe is really...
But you don't think he's going to make it to November of 24?
Well, I think he's worse mentally than he is physically. And physically, he's not exactly a triathlete or any kind of an athlete. You look at him, he can't walk to the helicopter. He walks, he can't lift his feet out of the grass. You know, it's only 2 inches at the White House, right? That's not a lot. But you watch him, and it looks like he's walking on toothpicks. He's supposed to be getting us out of that horrible, horrible war that we're very much involved in with Russia and Ukraine. You could do that. You could do that very easily. I believe you could do that I don't believe he could do it because he's just incompetent. But that's a war that should end immediately, not because of one side or the other, because hundreds of thousands of people are being killed. Can you imagine you're in an apartment house and rockets are going into that building and blowing it up and knocking it down? And why should anybody, human beings, these are human, whether they're Russian or Ukrainian or whatever they are, it's got to be stopped. And it can be stopped very easily. It would have never started. If I were president, it would have never started.
So back to Biden, I'm interested. So you think he's failing? He obviously is failing. I think it's clear to everybody. But that would make Kamala Harris the candidate?
Well, not really. I mean, I guess they'd have maybe a free-for-all. A lot of people say she has to remain for certain reasons the candidate. She has to. I don't think that's true, actually. I don't think that other people would stand for it. She has some bad moments. Her moments are almost as bad as his. I think his are worse, actually.
Yeah.
But
she seems pretty senile, too.
She speaks in rhyme. You know, it's weird. It's weird. But she has bad moments. And
in rhyme? What do you...
Well, the way she talks, the bus will go here and then the bus will go there because that's what buses do. And it's weird. The whole thing is weird. This is not a president of the United States future. And I think they probably have some kind of a primary and other people will get involved.
Newsom, right? I
mean, could be. I mean, you know, I always got along well with him, believe it or not. But could be him, could be somebody else. It's very hard to take on the Democrat Party. Look at RFK Jr. They're not giving him the vote. I mean, they're saying you have to get a vast number of votes in order to even qualify. They're making it impossible for him. You know, they're essentially rigging the election, which they're very good at.
You know, you've got a Republican mega donor funding one of your main super PACs. You've got Ron DeSantis saying he'd put you in his cabinet. Key allies of Donald Trump are saying they want you to be Trump's running mate. Why are you Republicans' favorite Democrat?
Well, you know, I started out this campaign saying that I wanted to end the toxic polarization that is dividing America, that I think is as dangerous as any time since the American Civil War. And, you know, a lot of people agree with that. A lot of Americans agree with that. They talk about the future in apocalyptical terms because of the division and don't see where there's a good end. And I feel like somebody needs to stand up and stop talking so much, focusing so much on the issues that divide us and talk instead about the values that bring us together. And I will talk to anybody. You know, I'm happy to talk to Donald Trump or Joe Biden. I don't attack either of them personally. I talk about their issues critically.
For Democratic voters, when they hear that a Republican is funding one of your PACs, maybe that gives them pause.
Well, but he's not the only funder of my PAC.
But he's a big one.
Well, yeah, but I've got ones that are equally big who are Democrats. I think that's a good thing.
RFK Jr. all of a sudden becoming a thing. Now, very interesting because Joe Biden, it looks like he's losing his facilities. It looks like he's falling apart. He can't remember where he is, can't remember numbers, what day it is. RFK Jr. comes on and he puts this thing out over the weekend and he's jacked. He's in great shape and he's 69 years old. Talk to us a little bit about, do you think you will face Joe Biden in a general election in 2024?
I don't know whether or not he makes it to the gate. I really can't tell you that. That's really the question. Will he make it to the starting gate? He obviously, he's got some problems, some very big problems, physically, mentally. I don't know. I mean, you tell me, is he going to make it to the starting gate? But, you know, they'll come up with somebody. I will say RFK Jr., who I've known not very well, but I've known for a while, and I respect him. A lot of people respect him. He's got some very important points to be made. No, he's a respected person. He's at 21, they debate? 22, I saw just now.
Should they debate, sir?
That's a lot for somebody that came in with absolutely no chance of winning.
Should they debate?
Would you serve in a GOP administration, given the number of Republicans who actively support you and support your policies, I could see a scenario where you could possibly serve on either side. Is that possible?
I would doubt it, but I'm not looking to get into government except if I can actually fix the government. And I think one place that I can do that from is the presidency.
And there's no other option for you to do that? I know that you don't have a plan B at the moment.
I definitely would not welcome that. And I'm not going to say that would never happen but I would never be happy. I would never be happy doing something like that. If you're talking about if somebody out, hypothetically offered me to run EPA, or HHS, would I do it? Probably not, but, I'm not going to absolutely say not. But it's not why I'm running. I'm intending to win.
I understand.
And I wouldn't want to.
You would be such a powerful force in the EPA given your background. I'd be surprised. I bet a lot of people would welcome you in that role, but of course we are talking about the presidency right now.
Should Biden and RFK debate? Should Biden have a Democrat debate? The Democrats don't want to put him up for a debate because I guess they're afraid he'll look weaker than he actually is.
Well, I just don't think that they'll allow him to debate anybody. I mean, you could put up a child. I don't think they'll allow him to debate. They're not going to allow it to happen.
As a lifelong Democrat, are you worried that you will be taking 10, maybe 20% of Biden's votes?
I hope to take votes from both President Biden and President Trump.
Look at the stats that shows you have 48% approval with Republicans and you have about 14% approval with Democrats. So Donald Trump's going to look at you as a threat if he does in fact get the nomination. Are you ready for him to come after you?
Yeah, I feel like I have my own moral center, and I'm not going to engage in the bitterness. I hope Donald Trump will dispute me on the issues, and that we can all talk about the issues that affect America and what's happening to the middle class, the systematic destruction of the middle class.
You agree on a lot.
There are areas of agreements, and there's areas that I have agreement with President Biden. So I think people are tired of the vitriol, and I'm not going to engage in that.
Absolutely. This isn't a prosecution. This is a persecution. It's really a sad day in American politics that you have the Department of Justice that has targeted a former president. And the idea that you have a sitting president who's taking bribes from Ukraine. We've got bank account numbers. We've got transactions. And nothing's being done. And so that's why I dropped the articles of impeachment against Biden. And enough is enough. The American people, quite frankly, are going to elect President Trump to be the next president of the United States, and I don't think Biden will even be the Democratic nominee.
You think Robert F. Kennedy is going to be the nominee?
Well, we'll see. I think the vultures are circling, if you will. I think you see a lot of Democrats not saying anything to defend Biden, and I think that's an indicator that they're waiting for the next shoe to drop, and he will not be the nominee. This is going to be Trump. This is Trump's primary to win. This is Trump's general election to win, and the latest polling data shows that.
If Carrie Lake's not President Trump's VP, if that's not the selection, you could do a lot better in a coalition ticket of Trump and Kennedy, right?
I'm just not sure I want to run against anybody else. I sort of like this one. And by the way, we're leading him by a lot. But just think.
I've been repeatedly asked whether I'd consider being Donald Trump's vice presidential pick, and I would not.
But in any GOP administration, would you serve cabinet, anything like that?
I don't know. I don't know.
Have you seen the Trump mugshot?
Yeah, I did see it.
What'd you think?
It was an interesting and probably very shrewd decision for him to put on that very defiant face. I think it's very popular with his base.
Do you think the mugshot appeals to the Democrat base in any way?
I had a mugshot when I was arrested in Puerto Rico in 2001 when I was doing a protest against the Navy on a lawsuit that I eventually won that got the Navy out of Vieques. But when you're arrested and you get the mugshot, you have a strategic decision about how you want to look. I wondered whether he practiced it in front of a mirror or whether he was just angry at the time and that reflected what he did. But I thought from a strategic point of view, it worked very well for him.
Well, joining us to share her thoughts is former Arizona gubernatorial candidate, former broadcaster Kari Lake. She's just written and released her first book out this week, Unafraid, Just Getting Started. Kari, it's good to talk with you. Steve Bannon said this week that Robert Kennedy Jr. would be an excellent choice as Donald Trump's vice presidential candidate. So what are your thoughts on that? Go with a Democrat?
Well, I think it's funny, it shows that we're almost beyond Democrat versus Republican. We are now communism and globalism versus Americanism. And I've been hearing the, fake news media attacking Robert Kennedy Jr., calling him a MAGA Democrat. I mean, they just don't want outsiders in the political machine. They don't want outsiders coming into the swamp and draining the swamp, whether they be outsiders who are Democrats or outsiders who are Republican. They want just the pre-approved, controllable, easily blackmailed, easily bribed people like Joe Biden and the whole swamp system down there. I think Robert F. Kennedy has done amazing things. His book is incredible, exposing Dr. Fauci and the fraud that he is. And I think he's an incredible man. I don't believe in a lot of what he espouses. I think ideologically, politically, we have many differences. And I think that he and President Trump probably do as well. But I do believe that President Trump most likely respects RFK Jr. and vice versa.
Well, that's because he's a anti-deep state.
Oh, no country can survive if it can't control its borders, and we're not doing that. The good news is this, that everybody that I talked to there said that this is easy to stop. That the way to stop it is very, very simple, and that they've been doing it before. Now, I didn't like to hear this because I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump. I did not like his wall. What the Border Patrol and everybody else said is, you don't need to build a physical barrier from San Diego, 2,200 miles to Brownsville, Texas. You do need a physical barrier in certain places where there's high density populations. The rest of it you can monitor with ground monitoring, very, very sophisticated surveillance and ground monitoring systems. Many of those were put up during the Trump administration, but for some reason, the Biden administration, when it came in, took down the towers and they removed the ground sensing systems. This is not something that, as a Democrat, that I want to hear. And then, once it got out that this is an open border and the cartels saw that there's a huge profit opportunity here, the flow has just increased exponentially. But we can stop it. During the Trump administration, the crossings at Yuma were about 10 to 25 a day at most. Now, as I said, they're 200 to 800 a day. So, we can solve this problem, but we need to do it in a way that's sensible, that's common sense, and that is not causing this terrible, terrible humanitarian crisis. From where I sat on the border, there's a tree that you can see on the other side of the fence, but it's in U.S. territory. It's called the rape tree. And it's where the cartels extract their final payment from women who come across, sometimes from children. The Border Patrol watches helplessly while they do this. I talked to people, this Peruvian family that I talked to that had lost their life savings because the cartels rob them, they beat them, they extort them, they exploit them, and ultimately they rape them. And this is a humanitarian crisis that that we're creating through government negligence, and we need to end it for everybody's sake.
Why do you think that our government could be involved in this evidence?
Listen, The Warren Commission, obviously, which was run by Alan Dulles, who was the head of the CIA, who my uncle fired, found that it was a lone shooter, which was Lee Harvey Oswald. But when Congress, a congressional committee, reinvestigated between 1977 and 1979 the House Select Assassinations Committee, they concluded, and they saw a lot more documentation and had a lot more witnesses than the Warren Commission ever saw. They concluded that my uncle was killed by a conspiracy. And most of the people, for example, Richard Schweitzer, who was the head of the committee, publicly said JFK, the President of the United States, the CIA was involved in the murder of the President of the United States. And that's a quotation. Most of the people on that committee at that time believed it was the CIA, that it was believed certain people in the CIA.
You were 7 at the time? 7 or 8?
I was 10 when my uncle was killed. I was 14 when my father was killed. And today there's overwhelming evidence. I mean, in fact,
why don't the government needs to release all of the files on it and let be transparent. Let us see the.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. There's still, the law requires there's a law that requires that all the records of John Kennedy's assassination be released to the public 10 years ago. So they're still holding 5,000 documents. President Biden promised when he was elected that he was going to release those documents. President Trump promised that he would, but the CIA doesn't want them to. And so the question that I think Americans have a right to ask, including members of, my father and uncle's family, is why not? What is it that you don't want to see 60 years later? And by the way, the last tranche of documents released had documentation in there that finally got even the New York Times to admit that Lee Harvey Oswald was a CIA asset, that he was working for the CIA. So, if the Warren Commission had known that back in 1964, they would have had a very different time. And the House Assassinations Committee never knew that. Mm-hmm. That was released. We've known that we've had documentation that known that at least a decade. But some of that documentation became overwhelming in this last tranche. And finally, the mainstream media acknowledged that, yeah, he had this relationship with the CIA going back to 1957 or 1958. 3/4 of Americans believe that President Biden is too old to govern effectively. President Trump faces multiple civil and criminal trials. Both of them have favorability ratings that are deep in negative territory. That's what two-party politics has given us. And that's why we need to pry loose from the hammerlock of the corrupt powers in Washington, D.C., and make this nation ours again. But there's a sacrifice that everyone, including myself, have to make if we're going to reunite America. We're going to have to surrender the kind of political addiction that is ultimately at the root of all of these divisions. And that's the addiction to taking sides. Our nation's renewal is going to begin when we start to treat each other with respect. Only then will we be able to step outside our tired, stuck debates. We can ask the questions then that nobody thought to ask. We can discover solutions that were right in front of our face. We will listen not just to the other side, but to those who are apart from any side. In a two-sided conflict, both parties have a kind of mutual dependency. Each side depends on the other to define themselves as good guys, in contrast to the other side, who, of course, are the bad guys. Well, if you're a team good, then you'll do anything, no matter how unscrupulous, to defeat team evil. And that's why we've seen both parties sacrificing their core values and the foundational canons of democracy in an all-out struggle for power. In a war against evil, any means justifies the end. The result is that we ourselves become evil if we participate in that battle. The child who is obsessed with hating a parent becomes that parent. As I've surrendered my attachment to taking sides over the past 6 months, I've been able to listen with new ears to people with whom I disagree and to see solutions that would otherwise have been invisible. I'll give you an example. 6 months ago, I thought that an open border was a humanitarian policy, and that if you were for sealing the border, it meant that you were probably a xenophobe and maybe a racist. I was wrong. How did I learn I was wrong? It wasn't just that I listened. It wasn't just that I listened to the other side. It was when I actually visited the border and listened to people who weren't on either side. My views changed as I spoke to Border Patrol officers, to local officials, to local sheriffs, aid workers, and to the migrants themselves. I saw that no one party has a monopoly on wisdom, and none of the simplistic narratives actually contain the whole truth. My promise to you as president is that I'm going to do this on every issue. I'm going to listen to stakeholders. I'm going to listen to the stakeholders from every side and beyond any side. I'm going to uphold my moral convictions, of course, absolutely, but I'll hold my own opinions lightly.
If it's not him, who's it going to be?
He's also the most corrupt president in history, without question. I don't know. There'll be a fight. I don't think that Kamala gets it handed. You know, a lot of people are so afraid to go against her. I don't think it gets handed. I think all of a sudden everybody would start jumping in. She'd have to earn it. It'd be very hard to earn. But I don't know. You know, they're the same 5 or 6 people that you report on and you see all the time. I don't see that. No, I don't see it. No.
Gavin Newsom.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
You announced in Philadelphia that you're going to run for president as an independent. You're from one of the most famous Democratic families of all time. How big a step was it to say, you know what, today, sorry family, I'm going to have to take a step away?
It was very painful for me. I mean, I was raised in the Democratic Party. My father, my uncles were the leaders of the party. My great-grandfather, Honey Fitz, was the first Irish Catholic mayor of Boston. My other great-grandfather, Patrick Kennedy, was a ward boss for the Democratic Party in Boston. I think it's the right thing right now because we're seeing that, you know, it's the same corporate donors that control both of the parties. And the parties are in paralysis. They cannot, within that party system, they're locked in this war with each other, and they're polarizing the American public, and we need a strategy for unity. We need a strategy for bringing people together. And what I've found traveling the country, even among the most extreme Democrats and Republicans, there's still more that we have in common than the issues that are being used to drive us apart. Everybody wants a clean environment. Everybody wants to take care of our veterans. Everybody wants our kids to have a good education. Everybody wants to make sure the regulatory agencies are serving the public interest instead of working for the corporations that they're supposed to regulate. And I think we need somebody who's going to find those areas of agreement, the values we agree on, rather than focus on these little issues that have us at each other's throats.
And Ted Kennedy, believe it or not, was a friend of mine. I met him through Palm Beach. They had a big house, a compound. They call it the Kennedy compound. And I had a very nice house also. But I got to know him very well, and he liked me. And I one time asked him, who's the smartest guy in the U.S. Senate? He was a smart guy, by the way, Ted Kennedy, very smart, great politician. And I said, who's the smartest guy in the Senate? And we were friends. I did him a big favor, I will tell you that. Big favor, really big. And it wasn't hard for me to do, but it was very big and important for him. And he liked me, and I liked him. I said, who's the smartest in the Senate? And he gave me a name, but I won't tell you because I can't stand the guy, actually. Still around. Can't stand him.
I was disappointed to hear that name. I said, who's the dumbest in the Senate? He goes, I don't know, let's see. Probably Joe. I said, who's Joe? He said, Joe Biden. Can you, this is 25, 30 years ago, a long time ago. I think it was one of the early times I've ever heard the name. And that was in prime time for him, but this is in prime time. Joe gave us the war on Israel and the war on American energy. What he did to our energy was we were energy independent. Think of it, as president, I will shut off Iranian oil and I will turn on American oil, and we will drill, baby, drill, and we'll get things back to where they are supposed to be.
I've dealt so intimately with these regulatory agencies. Usually when a politician comes into office in Washington, they vow to clean up the swamp. But they get there and they're intimidated by these agencies that may have 30,000 or 50,000 employees, and they have no idea how to reform them. So they bring in somebody to run that agency, somebody who's safe, which is usually somebody from industry. So President Trump promised to reform Washington, but he came into office saying, I'm going to, even he even talked about medicine and about vaccines and these kind of things. He then took $1 million from Pfizer, and he appointed a Pfizer partner, Scott Gottlieb, to run FDA. And another Pfizer handpicked nominee, Alex Azar, right from the middle of the pharmaceutical industry, to run HHS. And Gottlieb then ushered through the Pfizer product and made $88 billion for his company, and then left FDA to rejoin the Pfizer board. That's not ending the swamp. That is making the swamp even deeper. And I know when I go in there how to fix DOT, how to fix HHS, NIH, CDC, EPA, all of the three later agencies, because I've litigated against them and I've been thinking for 40 years, how do you unravel corporate capture at these agencies? And I know how to do it. I know how to reorganize those agencies to end the revolving doors, to end these financial entanglements with the industries they're supposed to regulate. And in many cases, I know the specific individuals in those agencies who need to be moved out. And that's why I think I'm in better shape than anybody else to reform, to get the kind of reforms that the American people want.
House Republicans continue to fight. The left is a cult.
I don't want to hear it from Republicans. We'll beat the shit out of them.
Time out. Taylor, I need you to
Start helping your party. Anarchy across America. Radical Democrats. Republicans. Democrats. Republicans. Lefties.
Yeah, I was fed up too. And that's why I'm running for president of the United States as an independent. I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and I approve this message. I'll look at the evidence and the arguments, and I'll choose not the easy path, not the established path, but the right path. In making an independent run for president, I take inspiration from the one other president who did not have a political party. And that president was George Washington. In his farewell address, Washington issued a prescient warning about the disastrous potential of party politics. Inevitably, he said, political parties will be taken over by a cunning, ambitious, unprincipled minority who will serve the interests of the party rather than the interests of the nation and usurp for themselves the reins of government. Washington's dire prediction has certainly come true. I intend to wrest the reins of both parties and return power to the American people.
Remember
Remember in the prior election, Joe Biden got 51% of the vote, Donald Trump 46% of the vote. Why does this matter? Because of these swing states, Brian.
Yeah, so here's the difference on the national poll. Trump, despite 91 charges and 4 indictments, is a choice, even when you break it down, of the majority of the American public so far as we look at it.
Yeah,
when we look at the battleground states, this is the key.
Yeah, so a little bit of a recap right here in Nevada. Biden won this by 3 points, a couple thousand separating Georgia and Arizona. And then you got Wisconsin that he won by 1 point. You got 3 points in Michigan, and then you got 2 points in Pennsylvania.
Right now, this is the only place that Biden's winning. How extraordinary is this? Georgia is suing him, by the way, after the way he acted after losing the election. I'm talking about the President of the United States. And so the people of Georgia say, I'd rather have him than Joe Biden. But there are some mulligans, some outliers that are really going to mess with this race.
Well, because you got some folks that are going to just want to be disruptors in the race. They
outside the major parties.
Outside the major parties. So RFK said, look, I tried to do it within the Democratic Party. I tried to work with you guys, but y'all pushed me out, so now I'm in. Apparently, he's getting 24% support in 6 swing states, Brian.
Right. He said, I don't even want to run as no labels. I'm going to run as RFK Jr. And we'll see. I don't even want the green label. This is the highest mark for a independent candidate since Ross Perot, before he dropped out and got back in.
Since the early 1980s, there's been a systematic attack on our middle class. And the coup de grace was the lockdown. The lockdown was the biggest shift in wealth in human history. And I'm going to tell you about that in a second. And I blame President Trump for the lockdown.
Is there any more consideration to a national lockdown to keep people in their homes?
I don't think so. Essentially, you've done that in California. You've done that in New York. Those are really 2 hotbeds. Those are probably the 2 hottest of them all in terms of hotspots. I don't think so, because you go out to the Midwest, you go out to other locations, and they're watching it on television, but they don't have the same problems. They don't have, by any means, the same problem. New York, California, Miami, the governor's doing an excellent job. Governor DeSantis in Florida. We have some pretty hot spots in Florida, too. But we're and the state of Washington, of course. But that was largely, if you look at it, it was 1 nursing home that had problems like you wouldn't believe. So no, we're working with the governors, and I don't think we'll ever find that necessary.
Now, a lot of people say, and President Trump gets blamed for a lot of things that he didn't do, and he gets blamed for some things that he did do. But the worst thing that he did to this country, to our civil rights, to our economy, to the middle class in this country, was the lockdown. Now, President Trump, in fairness, let me just make this point, will tell people, well, the lockdown wasn't my idea. It was my bureaucrats rolled me on it. I was saying we shouldn't do it. But that's not a good enough excuse. He was the President of the United States.
In hotspots across the South and West, we've seen slow improvements from their recent weekly peaks. Arizona's weekly case counts have dropped 37%. That's a tremendous drop, and the governor and the state have done a fantastic job. Down 37%. Texas down 18.7%. I was there a couple of days ago. And Florida, 21.2% drop. So that's a tremendous job that they're all doing. As we begin to contain the virus in these states, we must focus on new flare-ups in the states where the case numbers have risen, including Georgia, Mississippi, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Missouri, and I think you'll find that they're soon going to be very much under control. Meanwhile, 18 states continue to have very low case numbers and low test positivity rates, under 5%. Alaska, Connecticut, Delaware, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Montana, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, North Dakota, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, West Virginia, and Wyoming. It's under 5. Even in these states, however, where the virus is under control and at a very low number, Americans should continue to be vigilant, be careful, in order to prevent the new hotspots from opening up or any new hotspots from opening up in those states. To that end, I urge all Americans to continue to socially distance, wash your hands, wear a mask when you cannot avoid crowded places, and to protect the elderly. Very, very important, protect the elderly. It's much different. Young children have very strong immune systems. We've learned how strong they are. But protect the elderly. The average age of those who succumb to the virus is 78 years old. That's the average age. It's important for all Americans to recognize that a permanent lockdown is not a viable path toward producing the result that you want, or certainly not a viable path forward, and would ultimately inflict more harm than it would prevent. As we're seeing in foreign countries around the world where cases are once again surging, you have many places where we thought they were under control and doing a great job, and they are doing a great job, but this is a very tough, invisible enemy. Lockdowns do not prevent infection in the future. They just don't. It comes back, many times it comes back. The purpose of a lockdown is to buy time to build capacity, especially as it with respect to hospitals, learn more about the disease and develop effective treatments as we did in the United States. We're doing very well with the vaccines and the therapeutics. Countries where there have been very significant flare-ups over the last short period of time are Spain, Germany, France, Australia, Japan, and also, as you probably heard, in Hong Kong, they've had some very serious flare-ups. Japan has gone, a lot of six-fold flare-up. It's a lot, but they'll get it under control. In our current phase, we must focus on protecting those at highest risk while allowing younger and healthier Americans to resume work and school with careful precautions. Ideally, we want to open those schools. We want to open them.
Trump locked down 3.3 million businesses. And, what did that do? It shifted everything to Amazon. 41% of the black-owned businesses that were closed during COVID will never reopen. Mm-hmm. A lot of those businesses had 3 generations of equity in them. I drove through Lee Harvard, which is one of the poorest districts in Cleveland, and it was a booming area 5 years ago. Today, every single one of those stores is boarded up. And, I talk to people every day in the African-American community whose businesses were wiped out, and that's what happened. We shifted $4 trillion in wealth from the working poor and the middle class to the super rich in this country. We strip mined the black community of its equity during this pandemic. And, how do you rebuild that now? That is the big issue for our country. How are we going to rebuild equity with the working poor in this country? If you like this video and you want to learn more about me and the movement that we're building, please go to Kennedy24.com.
We had more revenue with lower taxes than we did with higher taxes.
You also added $8 trillion to the national debt. Your GOP challenger, Nikki Haley, made that point, saying, quote, "The truth is that Biden didn't do this to us. Republicans did this to us." Does she have a point?
We had a thing happen to us. We had the greatest economy in history, and then we got hit with COVID. And we had to keep this beautiful thing going. And if I didn't do that, if we didn't put some money in, nobody knew what COVID was. Remember, this was a new thing that came in. Somebody said it's dust coming in from China. It came from China. They tried and denied it, or they tried for a little while, and we didn't let it. It came from Wuhan, actually, which now they agree. Everybody's now agreeing that it came from Wuhan. I said that years ago. But we had to do things that were very severe. We had to let some money come out. We were on the verge of doing something that was amazing.
And as Harry Truman said, the buck stops here. On May 2nd, 2020, 600 doctors signed a letter to President Trump begging him not to allow the lockdowns. And they said because at that time, all of the pandemic protocols anywhere in the world, the WHO, CDC, everywhere, the European Health Agency, all says you never do mass lockdowns. It causes much worse havoc and deaths and injuries than if you do the standard protocol, which is you lock down the sick, you protect the vulnerable, and you let everybody else go back to work. Otherwise, you are going to wreak havoc.
We were going to have energy at a level bigger than Russia and Saudi Arabia combined. That energy was going to be sold to Europe and all other places. The prices would have come down. We were going to make a fortune, and we were going to start paying off debt. Instead, we got hit with COVID. People didn't need oil because nobody was driving all over the world. I mean, frankly, it was a disaster. What China did to the world with COVID is something that we're going to get to the bottom of, and they have to pay something back. You know, nobody can pay back the cost of all those lives and all the money that was lost, but nobody can pay back the lives and all of the damage that was caused.
And of course, you know, and I wrote about it for the, you know, on Instagram. I was writing every day. I was citing these economic studies that showed every point in unemployment you get 37,000 excess deaths from heart attacks, suicides, you know, plus imprisonments. And I was writing about this, and they dumped me from the social. They said that's misinformation, but it was not. But people were saying it. People knew it. It wasn't just me. And we now know, of course, that it's true. There's now study after study, and every comparison between the states and nations that locked down compared to those who didn't, you know, had shown the ones who locked down, the more you locked down, the worse you got. Worse COVID deaths, worse excess deaths.
We were going to make a fortune off our energy. We were going to send the energy to Europe. Europe was going to pay us tremendous amounts of money. And I'll tell you, you would have never had the Ukraine monster at all. It would have never happened. Russia would have never got, just by sheer force of personality. But beyond personality, what happened is when oil hit $100 a barrel, and by the way, it's right there right now again, Putin makes a fortune on this war. You know, everybody said, oh, he can't afford it. If Biden allowed my policies to stay in place, oil would right now be at $40 a barrel, and Putin wouldn't be able to afford the war.
Sweden's numbers came out this week. Sweden was the only country in Europe that didn't lock down. It had the lowest excess deaths in Europe, which is very predictable. The nation, you know, the nation that led lockdowns was us, and we had the highest body count of COVID on Earth. We have 4.2% of the world's population. We had 16% of the COVID deaths. At some point, even the media is going to have to say, stop saying this was a success story. But the health issues were almost dwarfed by the economic cataclysm that befell our country.
My fellow Americans, tonight I want to speak with you about our nation's unprecedented response to the coronavirus outbreak that started in China and is now spreading throughout the world. Today, the World Health Organization officially announced that this is a global pandemic. We have been in frequent contact with our allies, and we are marshaling the full power of the federal government and the private sector to protect the American people. This is the most aggressive and comprehensive effort to confront a foreign virus in modern history. I am confident that by counting and continuing to take these tough measures, we will significantly reduce the threat to our citizens, and we will ultimately and expeditiously defeat this virus. From the beginning of time, nations and people have faced unforeseen challenges, including large-scale and very dangerous health threats. This is the way it always was and always will be. It only matters how you respond, and we are responding with great speed and professionalism. Our team is the best anywhere in the world. At the very start of the outbreak, we instituted sweeping travel restrictions on China and put in place the first federally mandated quarantine in over 50 years. We declared a public health emergency and issued the highest level of travel warning on other countries as the virus spread its horrible infection. And taking early, intense action, we have seen dramatically fewer cases of the virus in the United States than are now present in Europe. The European Union failed to take the same precautions and restrict travel from China and other hotspots. As a result, a large number of new clusters in the United States were seeded by travelers from Europe. After consulting with our top government health professionals, I have decided to take several strong but necessary actions to protect the health and well-being of all Americans. To keep new cases from entering our shores, we will be suspending all travel from Europe to the United States for the next 30 days. The new rules will go into effect Friday at midnight. These restrictions will be adjusted subject to conditions on the ground. There will be exemptions for Americans who have undergone appropriate screenings, and these prohibitions will not only apply to the tremendous amount of trade and cargo, but various other things as we get approval. Anything coming from Europe to the United States is what we are discussing. These restrictions will also not apply to the United Kingdom. At the same time, we are monitoring the situation in China and South Korea, and as their situation improves, we will reevaluate the restrictions and warnings that are currently in place for a possible early opening. Earlier this week, I met with the leaders of health insurance industry who have agreed to waive all co-payments for coronavirus treatments, extend insurance coverage to these treatments, and to prevent surprise medical billing. We are cutting massive amounts of red tape to make antiviral therapies available in record time. These treatments will significantly reduce the impact and reach of the virus. Additionally, last week I signed into law an $8.3 billion funding bill to help CDC and other government agencies fight the virus and support vaccines, treatments, and distribution of medical supplies. Testing capabilities are expanding rapidly day by day. We are moving very quickly. The vast majority of Americans, the risk is very, very low. Young and healthy people can expect to recover fully and quickly if they should get the virus. The highest risk is for elderly population with underlying health conditions. The elderly population must be very, very careful. In particular, we are strongly advising that nursing homes for the elderly suspend all medically unnecessary visits. In general, older Americans should also avoid non-essential travel in crowded areas. My administration is coordinating directly with communities with largest outbreaks, and we have issued guidance on school closures, social distancing, and reducing large gatherings. Smart action today will prevent the spread of the virus tomorrow. Every community faces different risks, and it is critical for you to follow the guidelines of your local officials who are working closely with our federal health experts, and they are the best. For all Americans, it is essential that everyone take extra precautions and practice good hygiene. Each of us has a role to play in defeating this virus. Wash your hands, clean often used surfaces, cover your face and mouth if you sneeze or cough, and most of all, if you are sick or not feeling well, stay home. To ensure that working Americans impacted by the virus can stay home without fear of financial hardship, I will soon be taking emergency action, which is unprecedented, to provide financial relief. This will be targeted for workers who are ill, quarantined, or caring for others due to coronavirus. I will be asking Congress to take legislative action to extend this relief. Because of the economic policies that we have put into place over the last 3 years, we have the greatest economy anywhere in the world by far. Our banks and financial institutions are fully capitalized and incredibly strong. Our unemployment is at a historic low. This vast economic prosperity gives us flexibility, reserves, and resources to handle any threat that comes our way. This is not a financial crisis. This is just a temporary moment of time that we will overcome together as a nation and as a world. However, to provide extra support for American workers, families, and businesses, Tonight, I am announcing the following additional actions. I am instructing the Small Business Administration to exercise available authority to provide capital and liquidity to firms affected by the coronavirus. Effective immediately, the SBA will begin providing economic loans in affected states and territories. These low-interest loans will help small businesses overcome temporary economic disruptions caused by the virus. To this end, I am asking Congress to increase funding for this program by an additional $50 billion. Using emergency authority, I will be instructing the Treasury Department to defer tax payments without interest or penalties for certain individuals and businesses negatively impacted. This action will provide more than $200 billion of additional liquidity to the economy. Finally, I am calling on Congress to provide Americans with immediate payroll tax relief. Hopefully, they will consider this very strongly. We are at a critical time in the fight against the virus. We made a life-saving move with early action on China. Now we must take the same action with Europe. We will not delay. I will never hesitate to take any necessary steps to protect the lives, health, and safety of the American people. I will always put the well-being of America first.
Some of your appearances, and during some of the appearances of one Donald Trump, there seems to be some sort of mutual respect going on back and forth. Would you weigh in on if you have a relationship with him, if you're friendly with him, if you've spoken to him? Where does that lie?
I mean, I've known Donald Trump for, 35 years or 40 years. I've sued him a couple of times. I sued him twice to stop him from building golf courses in the New York City reservoir system. But I always had a congenial relationship with him. Even when I was litigating against him, he didn't seem to take it personally. And then and then in 2016, he asked me to serve on a vaccine safety commission, which I agreed to do. But shortly after that, he took $1 million from Pfizer and I guess talked to Bill Gates, at least as Bill Gates claims, and shut down the commission. And he appointed Scott Gottlieb to run FDA, who was a partner of Pfizer, and Alex Azar, who was a handpicked lobbyist essentially for Pfizer, to run HHS. And then Gottlieb, ran this $88 billion product through Operation Warp Speed, got it all approved at FDA, and then left the agency and went back to join the board of Pfizer. So that's, I don't think that Donald Trump did a good job of draining the swamp. But the thing is, I criticize that. I criticize his policies. I think he's criticized for a lot of things he didn't do. And, but I criticize him. I commend him for talking about unraveling the empire and his efforts to do that, to keep us out of war. But in terms of the lockdowns, I think that was a huge mistake for our country. And I think that, the medical decisions that occurred under his watch were a bad mistake. And I criticize those, but I don't criticize him personally. And I try not to criticize Biden personally, too. I think we've had enough of that in our country, and we have to learn how to talk to people with whom we disagree and to be pleasant to them, to be congenial, respectful, and kind.
First question in the news: Trump is obviously facing yet a third federal indictment, but maybe even a fourth coming with the state of Georgia indictment. Do we have a two-tiered justice system? Is this the Biden administration weaponizing the FBI and others to take out his political opponent? And then, if you have time, the border, it's a huge problem. What is the Bobby Kennedy border policy?
Well, the border, I was down at the border, and there's a humanitarian crisis there, and it's not good, and we now have the Mexican cartels that are running U.S. border policy. So, I watched 300 people walk across the border
only 2 of those families were from Latin America or Central America, one from Peru and one from Colombia. And in a 2-hour period, I watched 300 people walk across. Each one of those people is going to be given a plane ticket at our government expense to any city they want in the United States. That's how this crazy system works. And meanwhile, people who are legally trying to get in this country, and 7 million people have come across illegally over the past 3 years. It's a crazy policy. And each one of them is paying $15,000, $10,000 to $15,000 to the cartels. They are extorted, they're exploited, they're raped, they're robbed on the way up, and the children are lost. It's a horrible, horrible, horrible humanitarian crisis. And a country with an open border is not a nation. We need to close the border, and then we need to open legal immigration in a way that is going to be beneficial to our country.
Well, why do you suppose the Biden administration has been non-existent and they haven't done a thing about the border? In fact, rolled back some policies that were frankly working. What do you think the motivation behind that is?
I think it's baffling. I don't know, and one thing I don't do is I don't try to look into other people's heads. In my Fauci book, I never question why. I never speculate as to why Anthony Fauci did the things that he did. But I just, all I do is I enumerate them. I tell what I know, what's discernible. I do not, it's incomprehensible to me why we're doing what we're doing at the border. Some of it just seems like petty politics, that, we're going to, because Trump liked the wall, we're going to make sure that the wall's not completed. And because Trump wanted to bar immigration, we consider that racist, and therefore we're going to do the opposite. And I think it's a very, very harmful policy.
And final thought, any final thought on whether or not Trump is being unfairly targeted by various agencies?
Well, the only thing I'd say about that is that I think I'm a former prosecutor, and prosecutors have to be very, very careful in our democracy about prosecuting former presidents. And the reason for that is you don't want to look like, one of the, when we broke with England in 1776, one of the issues that we split over is that oftentimes political opponents of the king would be arrested and detained, and we passed all kinds of laws to make sure that that wouldn't happen in this country. At the same time, in a democracy, you want to make sure that government officials are not above the law, that the law applies to every person. So that's a balance that a prosecutor has to make, has to weigh, and you hope that they're doing it in good faith and that they exercise good judgment. And there's, I think that, my impression, and I'm not authority on this because I've never talked to the prosecutors to explore their rationale. But my impression was I was troubled by the New York case. I thought that case was too close to the, kind of a speculative kind of prosecution, that it seemed politically not motivated. I don't know. I haven't heard the prosecutor's side of the story, and I haven't talked to them. I think the case against the president for on the Espionage Act, I don't like the Espionage Act. I think it's always been politically misused. And then there's other optics problems, which is that President Biden also has these, top secret documents, and Mike Pence has them too. And so it looks like one side is being prosecuted more, but, than the other. And I haven't really looked into it very carefully, but it would be, those would be the issues that if I were prosecutor, I'd be looking out for.
Why you held on to those documents when you knew the federal government was seeking them and then had given you a subpoena to return them?
Are you ready? Are you ready? Can I talk?
Yeah, what's the answer?
Do you mind?
I would like for you to answer the question.
Okay, it's very simple to answer.
That's why I asked it.
It's very simple you're a nasty person, I'll tell you.
why
Very
you
simple.
held on to the documents?
I was negotiating, and we were talking to Nara.
Well, I think the problem is, number one, he's a bully. And, I don't like bullies, and I don't think America, that's part of America's tradition. I think in many ways he's discredited the American experiment with self-governance. Well, I don't think we should ban billionaires. I think, that's not the way to go about it. We had a 50-year part of our history, which is called the Great Prosperity, when we developed the American middle class, which was the driver of the world economy. It was the driver of our economy. It created happiness and quality of life in our country. And during most of that period, there was a 91% tax on the upper echelon. Right. Well, I haven't made any endorsement. So I'm just kind of I'm watching the debates, I'm watching what's happening to the primaries. My kids are working for Mayor Pete. My cousin Joe is working for Elizabeth Warren. There are a number of other members of my family who are working for Joe Biden. We have relationships with, very strong relationships with most of the candidates. And I kind of go back and forth. I hear them debate. I love Tulsi Gabbard when she talks about our foreign policy. I think, I'm most closely aligned with her vision for foreign policy than any of the other ones.
It's a new Trump feud with Caroline Kennedy. In a new interview, the Republican frontrunner attacked America's ambassador to Japan. Who is our chief negotiator? Essentially, it is Caroline Kennedy. I mean, give me a break, Trump said. She doesn't even know she's alive. Ouch. And look at Joe go. The vice president showed that he's got plenty of energy as he ponders a presidential run. The 72-year-old greeted supporters at a Labor Day parade in Pittsburgh, looking more and more like a candidate. You go, girl. And Hillary's team says they're working to soften her image. She'll appear on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon this week and on Ellen. Last time she was on the show back in 2007, she and Ellen had a bowl-off.
All right.
Before thousands were brutally killed, including Americans. Before Iran helped Hamas plan the attack, killing Americans. Before Biden gave billions of taxpayers' money to Iran. Trump played hardball with Iran. Destroyed ISIS. Kept the Middle East at peace. Kept us out of endless wars. Through strength.
History shows very plainly that evil only respects one thing: unyielding strength. When I'm back in the White House, our enemies will know if you spill a drop of American blood, we will spill a gallon of yours.
President Trump, the strength we need to make America strong again.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
To make the case, you say unity ticket, Trump, Kennedy. Tell us about it.
Look, I would love Carrie Lake or maybe one of these powerful women to be his vice president. However, I see a very compelling reason, although I know Bobby Kennedy's terrible on guns, he ain't great on Ukraine, but he talks about going after the administrative and deep state in a very significant way, led by the pharmaceutical industry. If we put together a unity ticket of Trump and Kennedy, it would be insurmountable. We would bring over many of the populists on the left, many of the people that don't agree, with Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon and Donald J. Trump, but that's what a unity ticket is. And I think we could get 2/3 to 70% of the American people on back of what we have to do in taking on the Chinese Communist Party, taking on the deep state, taking on big pharma, taking on big tech, taking on big media. Everybody that's it shouldn't be lost on people. Bobby Kennedy comes on Tucker last week and has a throwdown interview. And next thing you know, Tucker Carlson's given the bums the best and biggest show in the history of Fox. O'Reilly wasn't bigger. Megyn Kelly wasn't bigger. Hannity at the top of his game is not bigger. Glenn Beck was not better. They gave him the bum's rush. Didn't even show him the courtesy of of letting him announce this on his own due time and having a couple of shows for his audience to take care of, his goodbyes. Gave him the bum's rush, and one of the last big interviews he did was with Bobby Kennedy. That's how much they fear that platform. That's how much they fear the voice of Bobby Kennedy. If you put Kennedy and Trump together, that's the dynamic doing. And people understand there's a lot of issues that separate us, but there's enough that unites us that could take on the administrative state.
Well, I mean, the fourth branch of government, the Leviathan, I think is the number one issue when it comes to policy for the next Republican president, if we're able to win.
The Harvard-Harris poll, which is Mark Penn's outfit, the gold standard poll, showed 22% also nationwide, and showed me at young people under 36 years of age that I'm 10 points ahead of President Trump and President Biden, which is extraordinary. And then the New York Times Siena poll, which is a very, very powerful poll. A lot of the national polls are about 700 to 1,000 people. The Harvard poll, the New York Times poll, I think was 3,600. There are over 3,000 people, so it was really a very, very strong sampling. And that showed that in the 8 battleground states that show me an average of 24%. With 20, and remember, all I have to do is get to about 37%, because you just need a plurality, and it's winner take all with the electoral votes. So I need to get to 270 electoral votes. I don't even need to win majorities. I just need to get up to about 37%, and that will put me ahead of the other two contenders. And if I can do that in certain enough states, I can, I will win. And we have 12 months to do that.
Mr. President, when will you announce who your VP is?
Not for a while. We have so many great people in the Republican Party, but not for a while.
What criteria are you using to identify who your running mate is?
Always, it's got to be one thing. It's got to be who would be a good president. You always have to think that, because, in case of emergency, things happen, right? No matter who you are, things happen. It's got to be number one.
Who is your running mate?
Well, I have a lot of good people. We have a lot of really good people.
So you haven't decided who it is?
I have a lot of good ideas, but I haven't, and there's no reason
So
to do
you
that
haven't
quickly.
told that person, you're my person.
I speak to everybody. I speak to everybody. You know, I called Tim Scott this because a lot of people like Tim Scott. I called him and I said, "You're a much better candidate for me than you are for yourself." When I watched him, he was fine, he was good, but he was very low key, et cetera, et cetera. I watched him in the last week defending me and sticking up for me and fighting for me. I said, "Man," I said, "you're a much better person for me than you are for yourself," because for himself he was low key. For me, he's been a real tiger. He's been incredible, and others have too.
So maybe it's Tim Scott.
Well, it could be a lot of people, but it was interesting. I was watching Tim. I've been watching, for a while. I watched him campaign as a candidate, but I watched him over the last 2 weeks. As you know, he endorsed me, fully endorsed me, gave me a beautiful endorsement. And he has been really strong in terms of that. No, but that has nothing to do, I don't want anybody to take even any inference, but it's incredible. Kristi Noem has been incredible fighting for me. She said I'd never run against him because I can't beat him. That was a very nice thing to say.
What was the
It's
story
very
that
bad.
your team reached out to RFK Jr.?
It's a false story, no. It's a false
You
story.
never reached out to
what? I
RFK
like him
Jr.?
a lot. Nope, never happened.
The latest speculation is that maybe you would be the VP for Trump. Would you ever do that?
I don't think that my marriage would survive it.
I think he's right.
Just president. That's all you want.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, now I want to go to Vice President for a second. You know, I've written in the post that your short list ought to be Tom Cotton, Mike Gallagher, Joni Ernst, Mike Pompeo, Dan Sullivan, or Robert O'Brien. The latter, of course, would bring you Latter-day Saint votes in Arizona and Nevada. Are you going to name your vice president before the convention? Are you going to give us a list of people you're going to consider? And what do you make of my list?
I think I'd make up a list. Some of those names are great. I agree. And maybe not every single one of them. You understand. But no, I think some of the names you have there are great. And we'll have somebody that's really going to be very, very popular and very, very good. I know a lot of great people. We have a lot of great Republicans.
Now, the biggest issue he faces is getting on the ballot in every single state. He's on the ballot in 2 states, New Hampshire and Utah. I'd also asked him about something I'd heard President Trump had called him early on and asked him about being his VP. I asked if it were true. Take a look. If he asked you that today, what would your response be?
I would not take that job. I'm flattered that President Trump would offer it to me, but it's not something that I'm interested in.
Did he reach out, or his team?
People from the team have reached out to me.
The Trump campaign denies any such approach. Chris LaCivita, a senior advisor to the former president, says, just want to get this quote right, no one from the Trump campaign ever approached RFK Jr. or ever will. Now, clearly Mr. Kennedy has a different version of those events. But I would find it difficult to see Kennedy going into a Trump cabinet, though they do share some, I suppose, common ground in terms of skepticism of the U.S. aid to Ukraine, in terms of skepticism about COVID vaccines, frankly. Those sort of issues provide some sliver of common ground.
What was the story that your team reached out to RFK Jr.?
It's a false story, no. It's a false
You
story.
never reached out to RFK
I like
Jr.?
him a lot. Nope, never happened.
RFK is a radical liberal who happens to be anti-vax. That may be the one policy where he leans a little bit right. But he was for open borders for his entire life. He's against farmers. He was a radical environmentalist. He was super anti-gun. You know, he says he's changed his mind. He's changed his mind on everything that he did for decades. Everything magically 6 months ago. I don't believe that. So, you know, he's a phenomenal alternative to Joe Biden as a Democrat, but he is a radical Democrat. Again, the only place where he's historically ever differed from anything coming out of the Biden administration is that he's anti-vaccine. That's not enough. I think once people look at the record, it will speak for itself. So I think he's a great alternative as a Democrat. You know, maybe if people want to vote that way. But if you're going to vote for RFK, I see he's trying to get libertarians now. I'm like, again, he's anti-vax, but literally everything else would not be libertarian. But, you know, it's all part of the machine to try to stop Trump, as far as I'm concerned. And again, Yeah, I think he's certainly a better viable option, than Joe Biden for the Democrats, but he's no conservative. Let's not kid ourselves.
Let me ask you about your family. Many members of your family have been critical of your campaign. Prominent members put out a statement that said, quote, "The decision of our brother Bobby to run as a third-party candidate against Joe Biden is dangerous to our country. Bobby might share the same name as our father, but he does not share the same values, vision, or judgment. Today's announcement is deeply saddening for us. We denounce his candidacy and believe it to be perilous for our country." It was signed by Rory Kennedy, Kerry Kennedy, Joseph P. Kennedy, Kathleen Kennedy Townsend.
I don't begrudge them those feelings. I think they're very scared that President Trump is going to get elected, and they consider me a danger to the country and the republic because their assumption was that I would take more votes away from President Biden from President Trump. So
Donald Trump has to win independence, and that's why the VP pick is so important. Having someone out there who can litigate these cases going on in a way that is credibly received by independents and suburban women.
What qualities are you looking for in your vice presidential pick?
Well, always the first quality has to be somebody that you think will be a good president, because if something should happen, you have to have somebody that's going to be a great president. A lot of people are talking about that gentleman right over there. And he's been so great. He's been such a great advocate. I have to say, this is in a very positive way, Tim Scott. He has been much better for me than he was for himself. I watched his campaign, and he doesn't like talking about himself, but boy, does he talk about Trump. And I said, I called him. I said, Tim, you're better for me than you were for yourself. But he's fantastic, and he's a fantastic person.
Someone who can step into the role.
Most importantly, you have to view that.
The audience has been asked who they think would be a good choice, and various names came up. One of them was, of course, Vivek Ramaswamy. He's made a big splash. Ron DeSantis, who's making an appearance today in South Carolina, we just found out. Obviously, Tim Scott, Byron Donalds, and a big presence here for Tulsi Gabbard. Very interesting. And Kristi Noem as well, I should say. Right. Are they all on your short list? And when can we expect that you will announce your choice?
The one thing that always surprises me is that the VP choice has absolutely no impact. It's whoever the president is. It just seems. I remember when Sarah Palin was actually picked, and she did have a big up, and then they just went after her at a level that nobody's seen. The Republicans themselves went after what they did.
But you'll be a one-term president because you've already served, so you can only serve for one term, although they say you'll never leave office. I assume that you'll never leave. There'll never be another election
don't
again.
Do it. He'll never leave. He's never going. Oh, these people.
So for that reason, it is important who you pick.
So I think it's very important. But look, first is that, as we said, it has to do with whoever is, it's a very important position for that reason. You would like to get somebody that could help you from the voter standpoint. And honestly, all of those people are good. They're all good. They're all solid. And I always say, I want people with common sense, because there's so many things happening in this country that don't make sense. Who wants an open border? Who wants high interest rates? Who wants all electric vehicles? And they're fine, but you want to have choice. You want to go to combustion. You want to go to any hybrid. I think the hybrid are much better from that standpoint. But we were talking about faucets. We're talking about so much. It's all based on common sense. We want a strong military. We want choice in education. We want to have things that can really make our country great again. What we're doing with the open border is a disaster. We are destroying our country. We're going to change that fast, and we're going to get your energy prices down.
Mr. President, thank you so much for this.
Our leaders are censoring speech. Our political parties are stifling debate. They're trying to prevent candidates from running against a president by either suing them, like Donald Trump. And I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. That's why I'm running against him. But I don't think we should be a banana republic and remove candidates using the courts. Oh, Americans. I don't want to beat Donald Trump that way, with half the country angry because they couldn't vote for a guy that they wanted. I don't want that resentment and that rancor to leave that. I don't want to win
by cheating, by getting rid of somebody.
What qualities are you looking for in your vice presidential pick?
Well, always the first quality has to be somebody that you think will be a good president, because if something should happen, you have to have somebody that's going to be a great president. A lot of people are talking about that gentleman right over there. And he's been so great. He's been such a great advocate. I have to say, this is in a very positive way, Tim Scott. He has been much better for me than he was for himself. I watched his campaign, and he doesn't like talking about himself, but boy, does he talk about Trump. And I said, I called him. I said, Tim, you're better for me than you were for yourself. But he's fantastic, and he's a fantastic person.
Someone who can step into the role.
Most importantly, you have to view that.
The audience has been asked who they think would be a good choice, and various names came up. One of them was, of course, Vivek Ramaswamy. Yeah. He's made a big splash. Ron DeSantis, who's making an appearance today in South Carolina, we just found out. Obviously, Tim Scott, Byron Donalds, and a big presence here for Tulsi Gabbard. Very interesting. And Kristi Noem as well, I should say. Right. Are they all on your short list? And when can we expect that you will announce your choice?
The one thing that always surprises me is that the VP choice has absolutely no impact. It's whoever the president is. It just seems. I remember when Sarah Palin was actually picked, and she did have a big up, and then they just went after her at a level that nobody's seen. The Republicans themselves went after what they did.
But you'll be a one-term president because you've already served, so you can only serve for one term, although they say you'll never leave office. I assume that you'll never leave. There'll never be another election
don't
again.
Do it. He'll never leave. He's never going. Oh, these people.
So for that reason, it is important who you pick.
So I think it's very important. But look, first is that, as we said, it has to do with whoever is, it's a very important position for that reason. You would like to get somebody that could help you from the voter standpoint. And honestly, all of those people are good. They're all good. They're all solid. And I always say, I want people with common sense, because there's so many things happening in this country that don't make sense. Who wants an open border? Who wants high interest rates? Who wants all electric vehicles? And they're fine, but you want to have choice. You want to go to combustion. You want to go to any hybrid. I think the hybrid are much better from that standpoint. But we were talking about faucets. We're talking about machine. We're talking about so much. It's all based on common sense. We want a strong military. We want choice in education. We want to have things that can really make our country great again. What we're doing with the open border is a disaster. We are destroying our country. We're going to change that fast, and we're going to get your energy prices down.
Mr. President, thank you so much for this.
RFK called me a couple weeks ago. He was coming to Minnesota, and he wanted to meet with me, and we were going to spend 2 days together so that I can get him off of this vaccine bullshit and start getting him to truly campaign on something that could win him the presidency, which ain't vaccines.
No.
And anyway, though, RFK and I were going to meet, and unfortunately he called me the day before and said he had a cancellation and a change of plans, so he didn't come to Minnesota yet. But let me ask you this. Did you guys ever read the book I wrote called Don't Start the Revolution Without Me?
No, I haven't read that one.
Well, I think you should. And the reason you should is this. It was the book I wrote right after getting out of office, and I'm traveling to my home off the grid in the Baja. And my wife and I both contributed to this book. And in the end of the book, I wrote all nonfiction until the last chapter. And this was a book I wrote back in 2004 after leaving office. The last chapter, I wrote fiction. You know what the last chapter was? Wait till you hear this. And this is 2004, nearly 20 years ago. The last chapter was, I team up with RFK Jr. and we run for president. Only I'm the president, he's the VP, and I get assassinated.
Interesting.
Wow.
And I wrote that book 20 years ago, and Dick Russell, my co-writer, I said, Dick, I want to do something strange with this book. He goes, what do you want to do? I said, the last chapter, without telling nobody, I want to write completely fiction. Well, that last chapter, if I look at it today, might not be fiction now.
If he called you,
only the difference would be RFK'd be on the top and I'd be the VP.
if RFK offered you the VP spot, would you take it?
I would give it serious consideration. Certainly, I won't tell you right now yes or no, because it would depend on my personal life.
Yeah,
and that is the commitment I told you about moments ago. You know, would I want to commit myself at age 72 for 1 year of hell? And then the worst part would be, and then possibly the worst part would be this:
winning.
Yeah.
And then I'd have to do it for 4 years.
Let me explain something to you, Mr. Ventura. I'm going to explain. Listen, this is very important. I approached you after you won your governorship, and you totally haven't reciprocated. I asked you for your support. You wouldn't give it back to me. I don't appreciate that. But I'm going to offer you an opportunity of a lifetime. Do not go with RFK. He's a total freaking loser. I am offering you the VP spot on my ticket, and believe me, you're going to want to take it. There you go.
No, I don't think Donnie will be offering me that spot. I did a piece.
He would definitely be shitting a brick if RFK made you his VP.
Yeah.
Well, I did a thing on Substack where I compared Trump to Manson.
That's an interesting comparison.
Look at it.
He has that kind of power.
They're very. What he did on January 6th is almost identical to what Manson did on August 8th, 1969, sending his followers out, waiting for him to come back. And here's the scary part: the exact same number of deaths the first night.
Really?
Yes, 5 people died.
That's interesting.
Very interesting.
Oh God, the comparisons are eerie. And I get it on Substack. Pull it up on Substack and read it. Kennedy's our greatest president of all time.
Because he stood up to the deep state and got dead?
No, it's simpler. John Kennedy is the greatest president of all time because they allowed him to serve the least.
Oh.
They killed him. They killed him before he had even served 1 term. Let me throw something to you. You're hinting at me to go with the libertarians, right? Right?
Yeah.
And I have all the respect in the world for the libertarians, but I also have butted heads with them. Because I remember the time I was governor and I was giving a speech on transportation, and the libertarians started to boo me.
Right.
So I stopped my speech and I looked at them and I said, you don't think the government should be involved in transportation? They all said no. And I looked at them and said, well, how'd you get here today?
Yeah.
I said, you guys, I love your libertarian and liberty attitude, but in a civilized society, and if the society's civilized, you have to have government. I said, how could you not with transportation?
Well, the biggest quality, the most important quality by far is how would they do as president? Because you really have to, that's the purpose. I mean, that's 95% of it, I would think. But so that would be number one. But politically, you'd want somebody that's compatible. You also want somebody you can get along with. You want to be able to get along with the VP. You work with them. And I think that's an important thing. But you really want to make sure that you pick somebody that, should it be necessary, and we hope it isn't, but they'll be a great president.
Now, in terms of President Trump, what I did at the beginning of this race is I said, I am going to try to focus not on these culture war issues and the vitriol that keep us all apart, but I'm going to focus on the values that we all share in common. And one of the things that I really try hard not to do is to not criticize personally either President Trump or President Biden. And we're going to the lawsuits or the litigation or whether that's fair or that's fair. I just stay away from that. And I try to talk about the issues that they care about. And I think that President Trump knows that I'm popular with his constituents, that I'm their second choice. And I don't think it's his advantage to attack me. I'm sure he will at some point. But he also knows that I'm not going after him personally, that I do attack his policies. I do criticize him for his failures, particularly during COVID. He should not have shut down 3.3 million businesses with no scientific citation, with no public hearings, with no environmental impact statements, none of the processes of democracy. But what I've tried to do is really focus, identify the values that we have in common. And what I found is there's a huge landscape that is so much bigger, the things that Americans agree on. Everybody wants to protect veterans. Nobody likes that, veterans' wives are now at soup kitchens. Everybody wants us to have the best education system in the country. Everybody wants to end the forever wars. Everybody wants to end the chronic disease epidemic. That now 60% of our kids now have chronic disease. When my uncle was president, it was 6%. Everybody wants to end this corrupt merger of state and corporate power that have turned our regulatory agencies into predators against the American public and sock puppets for the industries they're supposed to regulate. And there are so many of these issues. Everybody, look, if you want to talk about climate change, and that's the only environmental issue you're going to talk about, you're going to have everybody fighting each other. If you talk about clean water, clean rivers, clean air, about stopping the destruction of the Appalachian Mountains, about the fact that 100% of our freshwater fish now have dangerous levels of mercury in them, that acid rain is destroying the forest cover on the high peaks of the Appalachians from Georgia to northern Quebec. People don't like that. And there's no such thing as Republican children or Democratic children. Nobody wants that. Everybody wants our kids in houses. Everybody wants that. And what I'm trying to do is look at solutions and and find those issues. And I found out that those landscapes are so much larger than the little culture war issues that are being used to keep us apart.
Look, people are saying it 100 different ways, that they want somebody, they know what's wrong. They want somebody who can find ways to put it right.
Next question. There's a billboard outside of Grand Rapids, Michigan, paid for by the DNC that says you are powered by Trump and MAGA. What's your response?
The DNC is saying because one of my PACs, which I have nothing to do with, legally can have nothing to do with, accepted money from a traditionally Republican donor, that somehow this should disqualify me from people voting for me. We get money from Democrats, from Republicans and independents, and I'm proud that we're reaching across party lines, that we're trying to bridge the divide. President Biden says that he's trying to bridge the divide, but this is just the opposite. It's saying that there's a big difference in, that you're not really American if you're Republican. And I just don't believe that. I think we ought to have presidential candidates that are receiving support across political divides. We need to bridge the divide and heal this country.
You've chosen not to attack other candidates. They've attacked you, the Democrats in particular. Why do you think they're doing that?
Why do I think I think that they don't. They have a candidate who doesn't want to debate. And so they have to try to win the election by litigating against people, by trying to get people off the ballot, by denying me ballot access, by litigating against the other candidates to get them disqualified. So we won't have to do democracy in our country. And, I feel like we should be modeling democracy around the world. I don't want to win this election because I'm not a fan of President Trump's. I don't want to win this election by disqualifying him legally. I want the American people to decide who they want to have as president, and I want to beat him fair and square on a level playing field. And I think it's distressing that the Democrats don't want to do that. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump's, and that's why I'm running against him. But I think it's I've been outspoken about criticizing the Colorado decision and the Maine decisions because, we have a democracy in this country. We don't have a banana republic, at least we're not supposed to. People ought to be able to vote for who they want to vote for. I don't want to beat Donald Trump. I believe that I can beat him in an election and that I can beat him in a debate. And I want to do that fair and square. I don't want the playing fields slanted. I don't want to have an election where you get rid of a guy who, a large percentage of the American public want as their leader, and you're going to leave those people feeling angry and frustrated, and justifiably so. I've read the opinions. I don't see how they can stand judicial, Supreme Court scrutiny. I don't think you can get. Donald Trump has not been convicted of leading an insurrection. Maybe he did it, but he hasn't been charged with it. He hasn't been convicted of it. So you can't really, I don't think it's fair. I don't think there's due process in punishing him for a crime that he was never convicted of. It's not the American way of doing things. And I think as a strategy that it actually hurts the Democratic Party, because I think it discredits them and it makes President Trump kind of into this mythological figure, because people can see that this is not fair. So I want to beat President Trump, but I want to beat him fair and square in an election where everybody gets to vote for who they want to vote for.
Sir, what do you think about Tim Mellon's donation to the PAC? He's a donor of Trump's, and in 2015 he wrote in his book that black people were even more belligerent after the expansion of social programs in the 60s and 70s, and that the belligerent quote was a direct quote. And
I am not legally allowed to talk to my PAC about any of these issues, any of the super PACs. And there are several super PACs that support my campaign. It would be against the law for me to tell a PAC to who they could not accept money from. And my opinion is that it's a good thing to have both Republicans and Democrats and independents giving to my PAC. I don't know anything about those comments, and I can't verify them or validate them. But it would be illegal for me to pick up the phone and tell somebody you can't accept money from that PAC.
all right, thank you, everybody. Thank you.
I'm assuming, I don't know any more than you do, Tyreek. I read the polls, and it seems pretty clear to me that my most likely opponents are going to be President Biden and President Trump. My polling now shows me with the highest favorability rating among all of them. So my favorability rating in the Gallup poll that came out yesterday was at 52. President Trump's is at 42. President Biden's at 41. I beat both President Trump and President Biden among young people under 45 years of age, and I beat them among independents, which is now the biggest political party. And I still have 10 months to the election, so I feel very optimistic about where we're headed. President Trump's not going to bring this back. President Biden is not going to. President Trump, I believe, wants to, drain the swamp. I think he was sincere when he said that. But he appointed John Bolton to run the NSA. He's a swamp creature, like the template for swamp creatures. And, Scott Gottlieb, who was Pfizer's business partner to run FDA, and Pfizer and Gottlieb did Operation Warp Speed, an $88 billion gift to Pfizer, and then went back to collect his paycheck on the Pfizer board. So President Biden is not going to unravel it. President Trump is not going to do it. And, I think I'm the only candidate that knows how to do this, that understands how badly we need to do this in this country if we're going to return the middle class and if we're going to give our kids a chance.
RFK Jr., you said voter ID was racist. Is that true?
Maybe. I didn't see it. I had a lot of positions.
It's actually a comic book written by a radical Democrat
RFK Jr., argues, among other things, that voter ID laws are, quote, I kid you not, racially rancid.
Red state people are more likely to murder you, to impregnate your teenage daughter, to commit a violent crime against you, to commit a nonviolent crime against you, to watch Desperate Housewives on TV, to buy pornography, to buy, degenerate video games like Grand Theft Auto.
You've called for curbing, logging, oil drilling, fracking. You wanted to eliminate it. You called it a victory for democracy. You want to curb U.S. fossil fuel extraction. Keep it in the ground, you once tweeted. You want a ban on fossil fuel extraction, a ban on fracking.
They are contemptible human beings, and that, I wish that there were a law you could punish them under. I think the Green New Deal is, all of that stuff is important, it's good, we ought to be pursuing it. I believe that we should use market mechanisms like carbon taxes. There's going to be major disruptions, not just to humanity, but ultimately to civilization. And this is part of the cost that we're paying for our long-time deadly addiction to coal and oil.
You called the NRA once a terror group. You've supported over the years Democrats, Gore, Kerry, Obama, Hillary. You've praised Bernie Sanders multiple times. You support affirmative action.
Senator Bernie Sanders is finally endorsing Hillary Clinton today. Do you endorse her? Is she that leader?
Yeah, and I'm very close to Bernie. And a huge admirer of Bernie Sanders. My family has a long relationship with Joe Biden, 40 years. I have a personal friendship with him.
Do you regret endorsing Al Gore, John Kerry, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Bernie Sanders over the years?
I like Bernie Sanders. I voted for Barack Obama. I don't regret that. And Trump came in and said, I'm going to run the country like a business. And then he shut down 3.3 million businesses. What businessman would do that? He handed the keys to every one of our businesses in this country to Anthony Fauci.
But Bobby, and I'm sure this is going to go viral because I'm about to defend Trump. When everybody comes to you, if it's President Kennedy, and says, we need to do this right now, this is not going to last a week or 2 weeks, this is a real problem, we're going to be overwhelmed, there's only one place that makes the swabs that we need, that's what pushed Trump into that situation. And then you had the businesses closed, you had all these people out of work, you had all these other problems, they started spending money. Biden continued to spend the money, Trump wanted to spend even more. You got to give him a little bit of a break on that. The pandemic was a problem.
Here's the thing, Chris. If I were president, that would have never happened. Never, ever. When my uncle was president, when John Kennedy was president, he was during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the whole world was on the edge of a nuclear war. He had 11 of the 13 top advisors, what they call the XCOM committee, telling him he needed to invade Cuba. If he had gone ahead and done that, it would have been the end of the world. We now know. So, and he said, no, he researched the issue himself. He said, show me the aerial photos. He asked the CIA, what is Khrushchev going to do? Isn't it going to make, if we go in and kill his gun crews in Cuba, isn't he going to have to come into Germany? And isn't that going to end up in a nuclear war? He asked the questions. He went granular. He did the details, and he figured out a different solution. And we need that kind of president today, and we needed it during the pandemic. And unfortunately, we got two presidents who made a series of bad choices, drove up a $16 trillion in costs, destroyed an entire generation of kids and their learning, did things that nobody in their right mind would have done during a pandemic, that violated every pandemic protocol that we've developed over 50 years. You do not shut down a country for a respiratory illness because everybody knows it's going to go through anyway, and it was an illness that spread indoors, not outdoors, and we knew that from the beginning.
Right, but they were trying to keep people from being in collections. Because remember, the people who made the protocols were also the ones telling the presidents to go this route, and it was echoed in many places all over the world. But I get the discrepancy on it. I get the discrepancy.
They were violating their own protocols, and nobody asked. You had people telling us, trust the experts. And of course, that is not a feature of, that's not a thing. Trust the experts is not a feature of science. It's not a feature of democracy. It is a feature of religion and totalitarianism. And in democracies, we don't do that. We question everybody, and we need a president who knows that.
Final thing, what do you think of the RFK Jr. independent campaign and the Democrats' relentless attacks on him?
Well, I think he's a nice guy. I've known him. He's extremely liberal. He's more liberal than anybody. He's more liberal than the Green Party. And so I don't know. I would imagine he'd not be good for them. But you don't know how that plays out. He gets a certain, not many points, but he gets some. But they say he hurts Biden. I'm not sure that that's true. I think he probably hurts both. But he might hurt Biden a little bit more. Right. You don't know. But he's got, not a lot of points, but maybe enough points to make a difference one way or the other. But he's a very liberal guy.
A moment ago, you said you essentially see Trump and Biden as the same, different issues. But do you really believe that when people talk about the threat to democracy that Trump poses, do you really think that is an equal evil to Biden?
I mean, listen, I can make the argument that President Biden is a much worse threat to democracy. And the reason for that is President Biden is the first candidate in history, the first president in history that has used the federal agencies to censor political speech, so to censor his opponent. I can say that because I just won a case in the Federal Court of Appeals and now before the Supreme Court. It shows that he started censoring not just me. 37 hours after he took the oath of office, he was censoring me. No president in the country has ever done that. The greatest threat to democracy is not somebody who questions election returns, but a president of the United States who used the power of his office to force the social media companies, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, to open a portal and give access to that portal to the FBI, to the CIA, to the IRS, to CISA, to NIH, to censor his political critics. President Biden, for the first president in history, to use his power over the Secret Service to deny Secret Service protection to one of his political opponents for political reasons. He's weaponizing the federal agencies. Those are really critical threats to democracy.
Donald Trump, of course, tried to overturn a free and fair election. He tried to overturn one, right? He's still fighting in court.
Yes.
How is that not a threat to democracy?
Well, I think that is a threat to democracy. If him trying to overthrow the election clearly is a threat to democracy. But the question was, who is a worse threat to democracy? And what I would say is, I'm not going to answer that question, but I can argue that President Biden is, because the First Amendment, Aaron, is the most important. Adams and Hamilton and Madison said, we put the guarantee of freedom of expression in the First Amendment because all of our other constitutional rights depend on it. If you have a government that can silence its opponents, it has license for any atrocity.
So just to be clear, you're saying you could make an argument that President Biden is a worse threat to democracy than Donald Trump. That's what you just said.
But who else has ever tried to censor? What president in history has ever tried to censor political opponents? What president has weaponized the federal agency? When my father came into the Justice Department, the first week he was there, he got all of the branch and division attorneys together, and he said, whatever we do, we are not going to use the power of the Justice Department for political reasons.
Trump, of course, has said that he would do that. He has said that he would do that.
Of course, and that is reprehensible.
And he is the only president who's tried to overthrow the results of an election.
Well, let me say something about that. I'm not going to defend President Trump on that. That was appalling. And there's many things that President Trump has done that are appalling. But in 2001, we had an election stolen in this country during the Bush-Gore election. In 2004, I wrote an award-winning article for Rolling Stone that showed how that election was stolen from John Kerry. So I don't think, and most Americans agree with me about 2001, that it was a stolen election from the Democratic Party candidate. So I don't think people who say that the election is stolen, not that we shouldn't make pariahs of those people. We shouldn't demonize them. We shouldn't vilify them. What we should be doing is saying, let's all get together, Republicans and Democrats, and fix the election system so that it cannot be fixed so that we're the exemplary democracy of the world. We ought to, Las Vegas, let me tell you this, Las Vegas is built on machines that can count and never make mistakes. Can't we make an election machine, and can't we have an electoral process that every American says whatever happens,
okay, hold on, but
it can't be fixed.
I understand that we want elections to be as perfect as they possibly can be, and one should not use the fact that the election was not stolen and was not cheated to not try to perfect it. I understand that distinction, but when you do as you're doing and you open the door to, well, we want every machine. You're opening the door to people who can say, well, then that's exactly what I'm saying. The machines miscounted, the machines did this, but they didn't. Every single analysis has shown that that did not happen, right? As you know. Do you worry that you're opening the door for people to believe this? Look at the Republican primary voters and that they believe.
I'm not worried. I don't worry about how people might misinterpret my words. What I said, I mean, and I'm careful about how I use language. Oh, I'm not saying that election was that there was cheating. I've never said that. What I've said is that there are problems, particularly, Aaron, if you don't have paper ballots. The election machines can be fixed in various ways, and that's just a fact. What we ought to have is we ought to have machines, and we ought to have paper ballots at the same time, and we ought to have a very low threshold to get a recount of the paper ballots. And that just makes sense. It's common sense. But if we implement that in every jurisdiction, you're not going to have problems where Americans at each other's throats.
I mean, so you're talking about a technical thing, like instead of having 0.5% be the trigger for a recount, you would put it even lower. I mean, that's the sort of reforms you're talking about here?
Whatever. I'm not choosing a particular threshold, but a threshold that makes sense. That's a very low threshold where you get a recount if there's some question. So, and that's, I don't think I'm saying something that's controversial. I'm saying something that I think most Americans, virtually any American, would agree with. Let's have an election system that even 10% of the Americans who are crazy people, that even they won't question, because our election system is the best election system in the world. And nobody, Vermont, for example, has a very, very good election system. Nobody ever questions the Vermont election system. And we ought to be able to do the same thing in every state. We are supposed to be the template for democracy in every country in the world. Let's make sure we put a man on the moon. We've had all these accomplishments. Let's make sure we have a system that nobody is questioning, even crazy people.
People are always going to question it, though.
Well,
they're always going to question it, and that
you want to narrow the margin of people who are questioning it to as much as possible by giving nobody any kind of legitimate claim about it. And that's all I'm saying. And what I'm saying is I'm not saying that President Trump won the election or that President Biden. And I've never said anything or suggested anything like that. All I'm saying is let's focus on the issues that bring people together, rather than constantly focusing on the polarization, on the issues that drive Americans apart and have us all at each other's throats with this very, very toxic polarization and demonization of each other.
RFK announced a running mate this week, 35-year-old from the Tech Center, seems to be very progressive.
They put it mildly.
To put all three of you together, it widens your lead right now. How do you view RFK and his new running mate?
Well, I've always liked him, and I've known him actually for a long time. I've liked him. He's a very liberal guy. He's probably the most liberal person in the race, including the Green Party. And so I think he's probably going to hurt Biden. I don't see him hurting me. Our people are solid. We have a very, very solid core. And I think that core is 60%.
So RFK hurts him more?
I think so, yeah. I think so. He's he's ultra liberal or ultra progressive, as they'd rather have. They don't like the word liberal anymore. You're supposed to use progressive, so therefore I'll probably use liberal. But he's a very far left person. Very, very. I think the most in the race. A lot of people were thinking, well, maybe he's going to hurt Trump. I don't see it. Once they see his record, they're going to understand how far left he is. He's a radical left person. And again, I've known him for a long time. I understand him. I like him. I get along with him. But that's his inclination. His running mate makes him look like a baby in terms of being left. She is really left. but she also has enough money from her husband that she can help him finance a campaign.
I mean, the DNC is really misbehaving. They're really trying to block people.
Yeah, they try to block you, right?
They try to block me. They try to block Trump, and I'm not a fan of Trump's, but I want to be on a level, battlefield with him. I don't want to beat him because a court threw him out. I want to beat him because I'm able to make the argument to the American people that I should be president, and I have a debate and that kind of stuff. I don't think it's good for our country. I don't think it's good for the DNC. I think this persecution that the DNC has leveled, that people see that as unfair. Americans just viscerally are saying this guy is being attacked, and it's moving huge numbers of voters over to him because they're pissed at what the DNC is doing.
Yeah.
It's also terrible for America, who are supposed to be the exemplary democracy and around the world. This is what they do in banana republics.
Yeah.
You don't want to run against the guy because he's popular. So you get a judge to throw him out.
Yeah. That's a great comparison.
And, it's not America.
Yeah.
And they're doing the same thing to me. They're trying to make sure that nobody can vote for me rather than having President Biden come out and say, here's why I think I should be a good president.
Yeah.
And here's why I think you shouldn't be. And let's have that discussion.
Yeah.
Not just say, you're not going to let me on the ballot. You're going to disenfranchise Americans so they can't talk to.
Yeah.
Any question?
Would you be RFK Jr.?
RFK, I don't know anything about him. Look, RFK is polling very low. He's not a serious candidate. They say he hurts Biden. I don't know who he hurts. He might hurt me. I don't know. But he has very low numbers, certainly not numbers that he can debate with. And he's got to get his numbers up a lot higher before he's credible. But the numbers that he's taken away, they say will be against Biden. I don't know. I'm not so sure. It could be a little bit against me. But I don't see him as a factor.
Well, Robert, one of the big issues for Democrats they've talked about is the threat to democracy. You raised some eyebrows yesterday when you were comparing the former president to the current president. You said in an interview that you believe that Joe Biden is a bigger threat to democracy than Donald Trump. This is what you have to say. Watch.
When people talk about the threat to democracy that Trump poses, do you really think that is an equal evil to Biden?
I mean, listen, I can make the argument that President Biden is a much worse threat to democracy.
Why did you say that?
And by the way, I said I can make that argument, and I think it's an argument that we ought to be having. President Biden has done something that no other president in history has done, which is to order media, particularly the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Google, to censor his political opponents. And I can say this because I just won a lawsuit in the Federal Court of Appeals now before the Supreme Court, because he began censoring me 37 hours after he took the oath of office, swearing to defend the Constitution. White House officials were on email with Facebook saying to them, you got to take down his posts. Facebook actually pushed back and saying there's no misinformation here. This is actually what he's saying is accurate. And they had to make up a new term called malinformation, which is information that is accurate but nonetheless inconvenient to, politically inconvenient. So there's been the First Amendment was put in the Constitution. Madison Hamilton had it, said we put it free expression to guarantee the First Amendment because all the other rights are dependent on it. If you have a president who can censor his political opponents, he has the license for any kind of atrocity. That is a genuine threat to our democracy. I think, what President Trump said about, about questioning the election and to the extent that he engaged in an effort to overthrow that, of course, that's a threat to democracy, but it is not the worst threat, undermining the First Amendment of our Constitution and then weaponizing the federal agencies to get his opponents off the ballot. And in my case, I'll just say particularly, denying me Secret Service protection. That's never happened in history.
You think he's behind that? What? Do you think Joe Biden is behind?
Of course he is.
Does he know that your dad was assassinated?
He has a bust of my father behind him at the Oval
So how does he
Office.
sleep at night?
Well, I don't know, but it's just not right. You know, all of these, the use of the courts, the use of prosecutors, the use of all these federal agencies to change our political landscape is wrong, and we should be debating about it. You know what President Biden did with his censorship project is he told the social media companies, we're going to withdraw, we're going to bring an antitrust case against you, and we're going to withdraw your Section 230 immunity, which is existential for those companies, if you don't give us a portal to censor. And then who did he give access to that portal? The CIA, the FBI, CISA, the IRS, NIH. So you had all these federal agencies that were now able to silence people who were questioning their policies, and that is really anti-American and anti-democratic.
RFK Jr. is, as you know, the most radical left candidate in the race. He's more so than the Green Party. He's more so than even crooked Joe Biden. But he's got some nice things about him. I happen to like him. Unfortunately, he is about the Green New Scam because he believes in that, and a lot of people don't. They want to see our country become rich and wealthy and strong and powerful and lots of other things, and not waste money doing something that nobody wants and everybody knows doesn't work. I guess that would mean that RFK Jr. is going to be taking away votes from crooked Joe Biden, and he should, because he's actually better than Biden. He's much better than Biden. If I were a Democrat, I'd vote for RFK Jr. every single time over Biden, because he's frankly more in line with Democrats. RFK Jr.'s running mate, Nicole Shanahan, is also a very liberal person, but that's okay. She's got plenty of money from her ex-husband. Kennedy is a radical left Democrat and always will be, but he's a better man than Joe Biden, that I can tell you. It's great for MAGA. I hope he continues to run, but the communists will make it very hard on him to get on the ballot, as they did for him as a Democrat. He wanted to get on the ballot. They made it very, very difficult for him. They really went after him viciously, just like they go after me. Welcome to the crowd, RFK Jr. But the fact is that the Democrats are vicious, communist, fascists. They're horrible people. They really hurt him badly, what they did to him as a Democrat. That's why he's running as an independent. But expect him to be indicted any day now, probably for environmental fraud. He is crooked Joe Biden's political opponent, not mine. Biden can't speak. Biden can't debate. Biden can't put two sentences together. So I guess he's probably going to indict RFK Jr. But I'm glad that he's running. They will fight it out together. We have the right and we have the center, and we have even center a little bit left, if you can believe it or not, because that group is radical left. They want windmills. They want all sorts of things that are going to destroy our country, and we're not going to allow it. If you want to drive an all-electric car for a half an hour before you have to go home and get it charged, then you should vote for Joe Biden. But it's going to be interesting to watch the two of them fight it out. I do believe that RFK Jr. will do very well, and I do believe he's going to take a lot of votes away from crooked Joe Biden. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Hiller, and I'm the Director of Content at Team Kennedy. And today we're going to be talking about numbers.
Nerd alert!
All right, by now you probably know that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is running as an independent candidate for President of the United States. But you probably have heard him spoken about like this.
A spoiler candidate? A spoiler.
Spoiler.
Called Kennedy a spoiler. I'm a spoiler.
But is this really true? I mean, is Bobby really a spoiler in this election? We looked into it, and now we have the answers. Now, the preface here is that most polls are conducted by mainstream media outlets, and typically they have 1,000 to 3,000 or so respondents per poll. And most of those polls have about a plus or minus 3% margin of error. Well, we conducted a nationwide poll of over 25,000 respondents, and our margin of error was 0.6%. That makes it by far the most accurate predictor of the 2024 election that we have thus far. All right, let's dive into the maps. This is the head-to-head matchup between Biden and Trump. Trump with 294 and Biden with 244. Trump wins by 50 electoral votes. And if you're a political nerd like myself, you know that that is not very close. And with Bobby as a third-party candidate, Biden only picks up 2 additional states, so he still loses to Trump. All right, now here is where it gets very interesting. In a head-to-head matchup, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wins 367 electoral votes versus Joe Biden's 171. Now that is what we call a landslide. And what's even crazier about these numbers is when you look at the ad spend of these two campaigns. Biden has spent over $36 million in advertising since October 1st, and we have spent a little over $2. Now, the next head-to-head matchup that we pulled was Bobby versus Trump. Obviously, this is a very close election, but Bobby still wins. All right, so to recap, Biden cannot beat Trump in a head-to-head race, and it is not close. Biden cannot beat Trump in a 3-way race, and it's still not very close. Bobby wins in a landslide against Biden head-to-head, and Bobby beats Trump head-to-head. So wait, who is actually the spoiler here? Because a spoiler is a non-winning candidate whose presence on the ballot affects which candidate wins. A non-winning candidate affecting a possible winning candidate. So if you do not want to see Donald Trump become the next president of the United States, there is only one candidate running who has the power to beat him, and it is Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Also, a Fox News poll came out a couple of days ago, and extraordinarily, the most popular major candidate right now, although he's for a third party, the We the People Party, is RFK Jr. Has an approval rating, rather a favorability rating of 47, followed by 2 points by the former president, and then Joe Biden is 6 points behind him.
Yes, and I would say, because I've looked at a lot of this swing state polling with RFK in particular, it's kind of a mixed bag. Sometimes he hurts Trump, sometimes he hurts Biden, but I would say for the most part he hurts Biden. But there's one line in the Wall Street Journal poll I'd be looking at, which is half of Republicans view RFK favorably, only a quarter of Democrats. This is why it is so smart for former President Trump to define him for what he is. RFK is a Democrat. You heard former President Trump say, look, he picked a Democrat. This guy, for all intents and purposes, is a Democrat. And next week, when Trump says he'll announce his abortion stance, he would be wise to contrast him. I'm the pro-life candidate. He is not. If you're a Republican, you need to be with me.
So that's suggesting that Donald Trump thinks that RFK would take voters from him.
Yes, he said MAGA welcomes him. So he was very clear on that. Yes.
All right, very good.
Would you become the vice president of the United States if Donald Trump asked you to be his vice president?
No, I would not. My marriage would not survive that.
All right, let's talk politics. A brand new Fox News poll finds that independent candidate RFK Jr. actually beats both Trump and Biden in favorability, as you can see the numbers right there. And their campaigns are reacting to the growing chance that he could actually change the course of the election of 2024.
That he has no path to victory. He is playing the role of spoiler candidate.
He's probably the most liberal person in the race, including the Green Party. I think he's probably going to hurt Biden. I don't see him hurting me.
We're going to start with Joe from Brookings, Oregon.
Joe, what's your question? Keep it tight.
Yes, would Mr. Kennedy be willing to do a one-on-one debate with Donald Trump, since we know Joe Biden's too senile to do it himself?
I would love nothing more than that. It would be great to have a 3-person debate, but I will debate either President Biden or President Trump in any kind of forum that they want.
Good luck with that. I don't even think they're going to debate each other, to be honest.
I think we're living at a time when the 2 least popular mainstream party candidates in the history of our country are running. Both of them would actually win the prize for the least popular candidate in the history of a major political party. 80% of the public says that they don't want a rematch of 2016. They want other choices. And, now it's a 3-man race as of today. People who support Donald Trump feel that they're regarded by the elites as deplorable people and that, they're not part of our country. And I think Donald Trump made them feel like they were part of our country.
Some of the tactics also pretty disgusting. We're hearing that the Biden legal team is throttling you guys by the throat. What's the truth?
You mean my campaign?
Yeah, I heard they're brutal.
I mean, we released a poll today. We did, Jesse, the biggest poll that's ever been done, and at least in this presidential campaign. A typical poll has 2,000 people in it. We did a poll of 26,000 people. The poll is a value of about $200,000 to $500,000. So we did every state. What that poll shows, if I go head-to-head with Biden, I win 39 states, he wins 11. If I go head-to-head with President Trump, I win. If I'm in a three-way race, I lose because people are voting out of fear because they think the other guy, a vote for me is gonna put somebody they hate in office. But if I go head-to-head with either of them, I win.
So if one of these guys drops out or doesn't run, Joe Biden or Donald Trump, RFK Jr. will be president.
That's right.
According to your polling.
Yeah, but, and all the polls that have done a two-way race have shown the same thing. I would challenge anybody. Our poll has virtually a zero margin of error. Anybody who does that poll will end up with the same results. I beat Biden in a landslide, and I beat President Trump narrowly in the Electoral College. And that's really what you want to look at, the Electoral College. But I win them. I beat them both in the general election and in the Electoral College.
Are you going to get on the debate stage with these two guys? And if you do, what's the strategy?
Well, there's no compulsory debate. President Trump has challenged President Biden to debate, which I think is a good thing. The debates are scheduled. There's 3 debates that are scheduled beginning on September 18th. I should have a spot in those debates because my polling up till now has beat those metrics. But you don't know because neither of them, the law allows them to not debate. It's never been done before. But
how would you do it? I mean, you got one guy over here, you got another guy over here, and what are you going to say? You're going to be like, hey, it's my turn.
I'm going to say, what were the two of you doing when you ran up $34 trillion debt? You two alone ran up half of it. We're now paying more than our defense budget to service that debt. Within 5 years, we'll be paying 50 cents out of every tax dollar to service the debt. And, that's one issue. And then they both, President Trump said he was going to end the wars. President Biden loves every war that he sees, but President Trump last week gave a bear hug to Biden and to Speaker Johnson and approved $61 billion to Ukraine. There's all these really existential issues and neither of them can really deal with. And one of those, Jesse, is the polarization. We are in a more toxic polarization and division than any time since the American Civil War. And President Biden can't solve it. President Trump can't solve it. If either of them get elected, it's just going to get worse because both of them feed on it. Both of them are telling all hate the other guy. And we need to have some common ground in America.
Well, you're saying you're going to unify the country. Now, some dirty stuff's coming out. They're saying you were against voter ID. RFK Jr., you said voter ID was racist. Is that true?
Maybe. I didn't see it. I had a lot of positions. I went through an evolution like many people in this country. And, I said things years ago. I had positions years ago that I look back on and say there was nothing good about that. I think what I've said on the voter ID issue is that I'm going to issue voter passport IDs to every American who can't afford them. That will end that issue.
Okay, because you have to have voter ID to have a clean election. You got to have that.
And by the way, Al Sharpton and Andrew Young and other civil rights leaders have said that if I issue that ID, they will stop their objection to demanding voter ID at the voting booth.
All right, Al Sharpton, happy DEI Thursday tomorrow. RFK Jr., thanks for joining.
So thank you very much. This is 8 days that we've all been sitting in this courthouse. This is all a Biden indictment. It's in order to try and win an election, political opponent. And nothing like this has ever happened. 8 days. As you know, the economy's falling apart now. Now you're seeing it, very little growth. It's going to get worse. Oil prices are going up. You have the college campuses all over closed down. Our country's going to hell. And we sit here day after day after day, which is their plan. Because they think they might be able to eke out an election, but I doubt it, because the poll numbers are very good for us. I just want to say that I've invited Biden to debate. He can do it anytime he wants, including tonight. I'm ready. Here we are. I invited him to the courthouse that he has us tied up in with his administration. This is all being done through Washington. It's all a well-coordinated attack on a political opponent. But I'm here. I'm ready, willing, and able. And if he wants, I'll do it on Monday night, Tuesday night, or Wednesday night. We'll be in Michigan, a state that he's destroyed because of the auto industry. We're not going to have any jobs left in Michigan. No auto jobs left in Michigan. They're all going over to China and other places with this ridiculous EV mandate, electric vehicle mandate. But we're willing to do it Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, or Friday night on national television. We're ready. Just tell me where. We'll do it in the White House. That would be very comfortable, actually. But you tell me where. But we're ready. He's obviously not showing up now. We heard nothing. But he said today that, I'd love to debate, but he won't debate. I don't think he'll debate. Maybe he will. Maybe he will. I'm not sure he has a choice. But that's the story. So here we are. We're ready, willing, and able. And we don't see him, and I don't think he'll be here. But maybe next week he'll do it. I doubt it, but maybe next week. So I just want to thank everybody for being here. I know you have to suffer through this like everybody else. Nothing has come. This is a case that should have never been brought. Every legal scholar, every legal expert, Andy McCarthy, Jonathan, Andy, every single one. Jonathan Turley came out with a scathing report on this trial today. Andy McCarthy's scathing report. Mark Levin can't believe this is happening in our country. There's no case here. There's no case whatsoever. It's a disgrace. We have a conflicted judge, and it shouldn't be happening. Not in this country. Thank you very much. Do you think you beat Biden today?
If there was ever any time in the last 200 years that an independent candidate could win the presidency, it's now. Even the traditional mainstream media admits that 2/3 of Americans don't want to see a contest between President Trump and President Biden alone. My opponents are worried, which is why you're seeing so many dirty tricks attacks and condemnation of me by both President Biden and President Trump and the Republican and Democratic parties. Today, for the first time in American history, self-identified independents outnumber both Republican and Democratic voters. And independents favor me over President Biden or President Trump. I was particularly interested in a recent poll by NBC, which never gives me favorable treatment, but which acknowledged that 34% of Americans would consider voting for me. And in a three-way race, 34% is enough to win the election. Currently, polls show that about 20% of Americans have never heard of me and don't know that I'm running for president. So we have some work to do to get the word out about my campaign, but we also have a tremendous amount of headroom. Virtually everybody in our country knows that President Biden and President Trump are running, so they don't have much room to grow their supporters, and very few people are likely to change their minds about who among those two is the lesser of two evils. And keep in mind that when pollsters publish their surveys, they exclude those people who they consider unlikely voters. Based on historical records, they consider young people highly unlikely to vote. But what would happen if young people actually became excited about a candidate, as has happened in the past? They could provide a decisive margin of victory to my campaign. During the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam era, young people who had never voted before in great numbers suddenly began voting in overwhelming numbers, and they changed the national debate. And guess what? Young people support me at a much higher margin, and they support either President Trump or President Biden. Young people are disgusted by the division. They're dismayed by the forever wars. They understand that they're not going to live the American dream, that they're not going to get their own homes, and they want somebody who's listening to them, and I'm that somebody. I'm going to end the forever wars, and I'm going to use the peace dividend to make sure that our young people get into homes and that they can have equity so that they can pursue their entrepreneurial impulses and rebuild America and small business in this country again. I can win the presidency, but I can't do it alone. I need your help. We have an FEC filing deadline on April 30th. That's very, very important to our campaign. Let's show the political establishment that Americans this time around are not going to be manipulated again by fear. They're going to vote for a candidate that they actually want to see as president. Please contribute to my campaign as much as you can. There is no more important time than now to donate.
When it comes to the regulatory capture, I think that even President Trump would admit at this point that he would have to do a much better job in his second term with regard to staffing.
But why do you give him a second term if he's messed it up so badly the first time? He said he was going to do that the first time. If I had been president, I would have done it. He was able, and even when he knew what was wrong, he said, well, I'll never lock down this country. But he got rolled by his bureaucrats.
I mean, I think that a lot of people who support President Trump, myself included, will believe that he got rolled by his own state.
Yeah,
and that's why 2020 was a disaster.
We need somebody in there who will not get rolled by their bureaucrats.
RFK Jr. is a Democrat plant, a radical left liberal who's been put in place in order to help crooked Joe Biden, the worst president in the history of the United States, get reelected. A lot of people think that Jr. is a conservative. He's not. He's more liberal than anybody running on the Democrat side. A vote for Jr. would essentially be a wasted protest vote that could swing either way, but would only swing against the Democrats if Republicans knew the true story about him. Jr. is totally anti-gun, an extreme environmentalist who makes the Green New scammers look very conservative by comparison. A big-time taxer, he wants to tax you. An open border advocate. He wants those borders to be wide open for more people to come in from prisons and mental institutions. And he's anti-military and he's anti-vet. He's an extreme liberal. He's radical left, and radicalized also are his family. They'll never allow him to be a Republican. They've said that we will not let him be a Republican. And his chief funder is the VP candidate that nobody ever heard of except her ex-husband, who's been stripped of a big chunk of his cash, and he knows exactly what she's all about. She's even more liberal than RFK Jr. She puts herself down as a businesswoman or maybe a doctor, and actually she probably is, because she did a hell of a big number on the husband. That's her business. I guess you could say that she's right, however, because what she's done is given a lot of money to the Democrat causes and the ultra-liberal causes. She's going to be a big hindrance because when people saw that she was selected, they realized that Junior was indeed a radical left. She's more liberal than Junior by far, not a serious person, and only a pot of cash to help her get her no-chance candidate on the ballot is what got her there in the first place. I lived with RFK Jr. in New York and watched him convince Governor Cuomo to make environmental moves that were outright nasty and really bad for the state. We have the highest energy costs anywhere in the country, and that's because of RFK Jr. He was a disaster. Upstate New York was not allowed to drill or frack as Ohio, Pennsylvania, and others ripped off New York energy. Because of this, prices have skyrocketed all over that part of the country, and frankly, it's affected New England, it's affected everybody. But all of this was the policy of RFK Jr. He doesn't want any drilling whatsoever. He doesn't want anything. He wants everything to come to a halt, and you'd find that out. But the fact is, he is a radical left person. So Republicans, get it out of your mind that you're going to vote for this guy because he's conservative. He's not. And by the way, he said the other night that vaccines are fine. He said it on a show, a television show, that vaccines are fine. He's all for them. And that's what he said. And for those of you that want to vote because you think he's an anti-vaxxer, he's not really an anti-vaxxer. That's only his political moment. He said it the other night. He's okay with the vaccine. Their energy costs are the highest in the United States, in New York State and New England, because of this guy, with the exception of California and Gavin Newsom, who's the worst governor in the state's history and one of the worst governors in the history of our country. I'd even take Biden over Jr. because our country would last about a year or two longer than it would with Jr. It would collapse almost immediately, and his family, a radical left, a crazy left, a bunch of lunatics, would take over, and our country will die very quickly. So RFK's views on vaccines are fake, as is everything else about his candidacy. He is not a Republican, so don't think you're going to vote for him and feel good. He's a radical left Democrat. Let the Democrats have RFK Jr. They deserve him.
You're calling for a debate with President Trump. You have an open letter to him. I'll let you explain it.
Yeah, we're both, Eric, thanks for having me, first of all. We're both speaking at the Libertarian Convention in Washington, D.C. on May 24th and 25th. I've invited President Trump to debate. He's repeatedly said that he is willing to debate anytime, any place. He said that he specifically would debate me as long as my poll numbers are up. My numbers now in the latest Quinnipiac poll and the CNN poll exceed the 15% threshold. We also have just done the biggest poll of the campaign. Typical polls, Eric, are around 22,000 people, 1,200 to 2,000 people. Our poll was 26,000 people. It costs almost $200,000 of the value of this poll. Other people would charge $500,000 for it. It is so large that it has virtually a zero margin of error. And that poll shows, we did head-to-head races, and that poll shows that in a head-to-head race, I beat President Trump narrowly, and that I beat President Biden in a landslide. That the poll also shows that whether I'm in the race or I'm out of the race, President Biden cannot win the race. And in fact, President Trump wins 2 extra states if Maryland or Virginia and Maine, if I drop out of the race. But the poll shows me that the first time in history in head-to-head races, a third-party candidate beating the candidates of both political parties. And that's unprecedented.
Here you are, and you put this open letter out. Have you heard back from the Trump campaign?
We have not heard from him yet, but we hope to hear from him, and I hope to see him at the Libertarian Convention. The other news that we have is we got on the ballot in the state of Delaware. So we now have sufficient signatures for 11 states. We're getting 2 or 3 states a week, and we'll continue doing that until we have all 50. We will be on all 50 by July. And something that, again, has never been done with this many, a million signatures. We're going to get almost 2 million. We're going to get about double what we need to give us a big cushion, because the DNC and the RNC are both trying to throw us off the ballot because they don't want to have this contest. And then, the last piece of news is that we put out 2 days ago, we put the Super PAC, the Kennedy, the American Values Super PAC, put out a 30-minute video called Who is Bobby Kennedy? It's narrated by Woody Harrelson. It's a very, very powerful video, and it already has 100 million views. Both Facebook and Instagram have been actively censoring the video. They've been removing it from people's platforms, and now they continue. Now we've called their attention and threatened litigation. They've allowed people to actually post it, but they are shadow banning it and slow walking it. So we're looking at our litigation options right now, but over 100 million people have now seen that video.
So I want to get to that in a second. It's a great video, by the way. I've watched it in full. Back to the debate, and we'll get the other. You sure you want to debate Donald Trump? I mean, there are stages littered with political careers everywhere in the aftermath of people wanting to debate Donald Trump. The guy's a master debater without a question. You up for that? You ready for that?
I am, and I agree with you. I think President Trump is arguably, well, he's certainly the best debater in modern political history. I would say since my uncle. My uncle was also a very good debater, and who knows, what would have happened if my uncle had come across Donald Trump. I can't imagine it, but you could argue that he's the best debater since the Lincoln-Douglas debate. He's gone through, as you know, in 2016, he went through 16 opponents and, left them all in mayhem.
Here's a strategic question for you. So, let's say, small circle, President Trump is sitting there saying, eventually we're going to have to go through RFK. And we have to figure that out because it's going to be challenging. The last RFK was an RP, right? And you know who RP was? Yeah. Ross Perot, right? And he had 19.5%, 21%, whatever the number was. And in George Bush Sr.'s documentary that was done, it's a great documentary, you got to watch it. The last 2 minutes of the documentary, the guy interviewing him asks a question about Ross Perot. It's the only thing he didn't want to answer. He got upset and walked away. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Highly recommend you watch it. Yeah. I think it's actually a very good documentary for you to watch to see exactly what happened with him, because I think that time's going to come as well. Let's say if you are chosen as a VP or whatever the role may be, let's say you are the VP. Do you think you could help, since you and RFK have a relationship together, to have RFK potentially, not necessarily, the better word would be to team up, because a lot of the values on what he likes, the left cannot stand him. Even the other day, a story came out, I think last week, talking about the Kennedy family. It's all behind Biden, kind of trying to undermine him. The fact that if your own family cannot support you, why would you support an RFK? They're dividing one of the most powerful Democratic last names, possibly the most powerful Democratic last name we've had the last 80 years, right? 100 years with Joseph and what he did. What role would you play if you were on the inside to be able to communicate with RFK?
I think that as this election season moves on, I'm not going to violate any privacy of the conversations that RFK and I have already had about what's going on in the country and how we share many of the same concerns about the direction our country is headed in. If it gets to that point, where it appears that RFK's candidacy would help return Joe Biden to the White House, my hope would be that he would recognize that and shift course to make sure that that doesn't happen.
And you think you have enough of a relationship or influence for him to consider that?
We are good friends, but as you know, he is his own person.
Right.
So Just like every one of us, I have made a choice in my heart about what is at stake in this election, and as you'll see in the book, For Love of Country, this is what's motivating me. I'm going to be on the road for the rest of the year until the election is done. I'm not getting back to. I was home a few weeks ago, and my mom asked when I was coming back, and I said not until November 6th, because if I can have any impact and influence in sounding the alarm bells to those undecideds, to those disenfranchised Democrats, to those independents who may feel in their heart that things aren't right, but don't have, the intellectual ammunition or the facts or the resources or those shared experiences to help make that decision for them. I'm going to put everything that I have into this election, because our country is at stake, and I hope and encourage everyone everywhere to do the same.
So, Rob, can you do me a favor and pull up the VP? Because I know it's a tough question for me to ask, and it's unfair for you to answer it because there's conversations that's been had privately, and you don't want to compromise that because later on it's going to come back, so I respect that.
I just respect relationships
totally get it.
and friendships.
I value that. For everyone out there that's watching, Tulsi is officially on Minect. Rob, if you can show her Minect, the first 50 people that Minect with Tulsi, we will send you a copy of the book as well signed. We bought copies to get it out there because we are so confident in her message being out there. We feel more people need to hear from her. So the first 50 that Minect with Tulsi, ask her whatever questions you got, and those 50 names we'll get. We're going to send you a copy. Just make sure you're in America. If you're anywhere else outside of America, we're not shipping to you. If you're not in America, don't do the Minect. Only in America we'll ship the copy to your first 50 states. Thank you for that.
So if you like this clip and you want to watch another one, click right here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click right here.
Many of the issues on which you disagree with President Biden have a lot of crossover with President Trump, who obviously is running on the other side of the aisle. So, you're in a strange position where Democrats are suggesting that you're a President Trump plant in order to take votes away from Biden. Some members of the Trump camp are claiming that you're a Biden plant in order to take away votes from President Trump. Why not support President Trump as an alternative to President Biden?
Yeah, I don't see it that way. I think that President Biden and President Trump are much more like each other than most people, and Democrats and Republicans like to acknowledge it. And let me say this, because that's going to be a controversial statement. I want to qualify it. I think President Trump and President Biden are very different in their temperaments, and extremely different. They're different in their professed ideologies. They're different in their personalities and their rhetoric. But the issues that they differ on are in a very, very narrow band. They're mainly culture war issues. They're abortion, it's guns, the border, woke ideology, those kind of transgender stuff. Some of them very, very important issues. The border is the only one that I would say is even vaguely existential. But the big issues at America that are existential to our country, that really threaten all of us, that are most concerned to all of us, neither of them has even taken positions on. The debt, for example, they're both equally bad on the debt. The debt is the most important issue. It's $34 trillion. The service on that debt is now larger than our defense budget, and our defense budget is larger than the next 10 defense budgets for the next 10 countries in the world all put together. So that is, and President Trump and President Biden are largely responsible individually for that debt. President Trump ran up the biggest debt in history. He put $8 trillion on that number. And that is more than all the presidents in 283 years of history before him. And President Biden put almost that much on it. So within 5 years, 50 cents out of every dollar that is collected in taxes is going to go to servicing the debt. Within 10 years, and particularly if interest rates rise, within 10 years, 100% of every dollar collected in taxes will go to servicing the debt. This is really an existential crisis for our country, and you don't hear President Biden or President Trump ever talk about it.
You do seem at times to be warm towards President Trump, and he is clearly warm towards you. And
I would definitely disagree with that. He just called me a radical effing liberal.
But he also said you're a common sense guy, and you guys in public have exchanged warm words. I think that's fair. And you said you're proud that he likes you.
I've said good things about President Biden.
And Biden's fine.
He's been my friend.
But here's where I'm going with the Trump thing. You endorsed his opponent in 2016, correct?
Hillary.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. What since 2016, in his first term, and then him refusing to leave office peacefully, and January 6th, and everything since then has made you warmer towards him? I mean, you went from supporting Hillary Clinton against him in 2016 to now, however you want to describe it, the way you talk about him now. Can you explain that for us?
Well, I can explain to you that I'm running against him, so obviously I don't want him to be president of the United States, and I don't think he did a good job. And if you go look at my speeches, my statements, I am not mean-spirited, Abby.
Sure, okay.
I don't try to feed into the vitriol and the anger and the polarization. I try to respect people, one, because of the office they held, the presidency of the United States. I always call President Trump, President Trump. I call President Biden, President Biden. I treat them civilly, but I criticize their policies. And I think President Trump's and President Biden's administrations have been catastrophic for this country. They've run up a $34 trillion debt.
Would you say roughly equally catastrophic?
I would say they're both been catastrophic.
But similar?
In their own way.
But similar?
In their own way.
Because here's why people...
You're trying to get me to quantify it so that you can win a debating point, and I'm not going to do that.
It's not a debating point. Hold on. It's not a debating point. There's a big choice coming down, and you are now inserting yourself, as you have the legal right to do, as a candidate for office.
Exactly.
But you're someone who, again, in all fairness, was giving these speeches against Nader for this kind of thing, was supporting Clinton against Trump, saying this is the danger of Trump. And now people hear you, and this is a chance to talk about it, but people hear you as very similarly to Nader saying it's a pox on both houses, lesser of two evils, what others call false equivalency. I want to play for you some of what Donald Trump... Wait, and then I'll let you respond, but I made this for you. This is some of what Donald Trump stands for and why people hear you, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., talk about false equivalence.
This is all debating tricks. You're lighting.
There's not a trick at all.
You're lighting fires faster than I can put them out. Every single thing you say, I can answer.
It's not
Give me a chance to answer.
Take a listen to this, and you'll get the floor. Look at why people say, how can you say Biden and Trump are similarly catastrophic or both catastrophic, quote unquote? Take a look.
They were both catastrophic.
Both catastrophic, quote unquote.
Different ways.
Knock the crap out of them, would you? Seriously. I will pay for the legal fees, I promise. Very fine people on both sides. These aren't people. These are animals. Proud boys, stand back and stand by the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country. I said I want to be a dictator for one day. It's nice to have a strong man running your country.
People are concerned not that this is Nader 2.0, but that you are using the platform and the following you have to suggest that they're both catastrophic and they're similar, and that you, they say, are ignoring not only the policy difference, but the actual possible democracy and autocratic threat of Donald Trump if he wins again. Perhaps thanks to you, your response.
Yeah, I never said that. So, like I said, I think both of them did bad things to our country. I think both of them contributed. President Trump, more than any president in history, built $8 trillion after coming in and promising the country that he was going to run the government like a business. He shut down every business, 3.3 million businesses with no due process, no just compensation. That's a violation of the Constitution. He ran up an $8 trillion debt. More money he spent than every president between George Washington and George W. Bush, 283 years. President Biden is racing to catch up with him. He's added $1 trillion in the last 100 days. We're now spending more for our national debt, our $34 trillion debt, and we are on our defense budget. Just to service that debt, within 5 years, 50 cents out of every dollar that we collect in taxes is going to go to servicing the debt. Within 10 years, 100%. It's not sustainable. They're both catastrophic. Neither of them can solve that problem. Let me tell you something else they can't do. Neither of them can end the vitriol that you are trying to pump up right now. I understand.
What have I said that's vitriolic? What have I said that's vitriolic?
You're saying to me that I need to take a side and say one person.
No, I'm asking you about, you're running for president. It's a big job, and I'm asking you about what people say out there.
You told me I would have the floor. You told me.
Well, yes, I did.
After you get
but you
your
just said,
long
you just
speech.
suggested that I am perpetrating vitriol, and I asked you to substantiate that. What have I said today that is vitriolic?
Let me finish what I'm saying.
Okay.
What I said when I announced a year ago is that we are facing a time in our history, Harry, that is more, and I think you'll agree with this, you are a student of history, that is more vitriolic, more polarized, more poisonous than at any time since the American Civil War. And it's all being amplified by the social media algorithms. And it's hard to see a way out of that if somebody doesn't come along and say, I'm not going to participate in that. And even if people act crazy on both sides, I'm not going to be part of that craziness. I'm going to try to talk about the issues that people care about. In fact, the fact that 57% of Americans can't put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency in their family. That cohort, if the engine light comes on in their car, it's the apocalypse. There's more than half of our countrymen. And these two presidents have created that situation. More than 50% of the people in this country are making $5,000 less than the cost of basic human needs.
Well,
and we're embroiled in forever wars.
So when you
mention neither of these guys can get us out of. I think President Trump is arguably, well, he's certainly the best debater in modern political history. I would say since my uncle. My uncle was also a very good debater, and who knows, what would have happened if my uncle had come across Donald Trump. I can't imagine it, but you could argue that he's the best debater since the Lincoln-Douglas debate. He's gone through, as you know, in 2016, he went through 16 opponents and, left them all in mayhem.
There are now 2 debates between you and President Biden, but if RFK Jr. qualifies to be on that stage, will you still participate?
Well, I have no problem with him. I think he's really not doing well in the polls at all. His numbers have gone down a lot lately, but I would have no problem if he got whatever the threshold is. But he's very low, and he seems to be heading in the other direction, in the wrong direction. I would have no problem with it, though. If he qualified, I would have no problem.
You're calling for a debate with President Trump. You have an open letter to him. I'll let you explain it.
We're both speaking at the Libertarian Convention in Washington, D.C. on May 24th and 25th. I've invited President Trump to debate. He's repeatedly said that he is willing to debate anytime, any place. He said that he specifically would debate me as long as my poll numbers are up.
You sure you want to debate Donald Trump? I mean, there are stages littered with political careers everywhere in the aftermath of people wanting to debate Donald Trump. The guy's a master debater without a question. You up for that? You ready for that?
I don't underestimate President Trump, but I think I'm uniquely able to confront him on issues that nobody has confronted him on. He has now been 4 years in the presidency, and I want to talk to him about his record. I want to talk to him about why he locked down 3.3 million businesses, shifted $4 trillion in wealth from the American workers and the middle class to this new oligarchy
I would love to see
of billionaires.
That debate. Now, I would love to see this debate.
This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent.
Mr. President, can you tell us, sir, Donald Trump refers to himself as a political prisoner and blames you directly. What's your response to that, sir?
Presidential candidate RFK Jr. joins me now. What do you think happened down there in Lower Manhattan today?
I think, Jesse, that it is going to backfire. This conviction is going to backfire on the Democrats. I think every time that President Trump has been indicted, that his approval ratings actually increase, his popularity increases. I think there's a large number of Americans who are going to see this as the politicization of and the weaponization of the enforcement agencies. And I think it's going to hurt. It's bad for our democracy. I think the Democrats feel like they have the DNC feels like it has a candidate that cannot win fair and square in the polls. And so they have to win in the courts. They have to win by clearing the deck and getting their other opponents out of the race. I'm not a fan of President Trump's, but I want to win. I want to beat him in a campaign on a level playing field. I want to talk about his issues, about locking down the economy, shutting down 3.3 million businesses, about running up a $34 trillion debt, about engaging us in forever wars and doing favors for Wall Street. I don't want to beat him in a courtroom. I think it's not good for our country, and I think it's really going to backfire on the Democrats.
Well, I think maybe you have a little bit more honor than the sitting president, that's for sure. Your uncle was the head of the DOJ and then eventually was ensnared in similar vicious, elite, and very dangerous circles, your father and your uncle. Do you see any similarities with what is going on now today?
Well, my father was the Attorney General. You know, his first week in office, he called up in 1961, he called in all the division heads and the bureau chiefs of the Department of Justice, and he said, rule number one, politics is out the window. We never prosecute based upon politics. We never ask whether somebody's Democrat or Republican. The reason he did that was because he understood how important it is for our country, the American people, to have faith that the judicial system is neutral, that all of us need to respect it. If we start believing that it's politicized, it's terrible for our country. And that's one of the reasons prosecutors, even when there's a case against a former president, like there was with President Nixon and many, many others, that they usually err on the side of caution, of not bringing it, because we risk making ourselves look like a third world country, like a banana republic, where nobody really actually runs the election. If there's somebody who's going to run against you, you get rid of them one way or another. And and this was part of our history in England when the king was running it, he'd choose his prime minister and his parliament members, and people who ran against them, he would lock them up. So this was a sensitivity that we had from the beginning, that we need to be very, very careful about separation of powers.
Well, RFK Jr., you know why that they're getting away with it is because the media lets them. If we had a fair press in the United States, they wouldn't even be tempted to pull these stunts. They wouldn't be trying to incarcerate their rivals and indict people for threatening their power. It's the media that's letting them get away with it because they're just not held accountable in the court of public opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that, Jesse. I think there's tribalism in the media, and a lot of them have forgotten what journalism is. A lot of them have forgotten about what integrity is. And we see this across the board. But what I would say to people is, in the Democratic Party, is even if you won this way, what is it going to do to our country? If half the people in this country have the anger and the rage and feel like that they're the person, they're a champion, that the candidate that they wanted to vote for has been taken off the table. When I was growing up, the Democratic Party was the party of getting everybody to vote, of making sure nobody got disenfranchised. The modern Democratic Party is just trying to get rid of as many possibilities for voters as possible, and it's not a good thing for our country.
It's changed. The party's changed, the country's changing, and it's happening in a wild, wild fashion. RFK Jr., thank you so much.
For more than 150 years, the NRA has been defined by men and women like all of you, loyal, hardworking citizens who believe in defending your families and your communities and our country. RFK Jr., I call him Junior. By the way, he's radical left. Don't think about it. Don't waste your vote. We need a conservative person with common sense. This guy is radical left who destroyed New York. They're taking down all of the energy components. We have the highest, and all of New England, actually. He's a disaster. He's radical left. RFK Jr. is radical left. It reminds me of this fly that's driving me crazy up here. This fly is brutal. I don't like flies. But RFK Jr. calls you a terrorist group. You know, he calls you a terrorist group. Can't vote for him. You can't, you know. Somebody said, well, they like his policy on vaccine. The other day he said, no, he'll go for the vaccine. He's got no policy on anything. He's radical left. He always has been. His family is angry at him because he's doing this. They won't talk to him because they said, where the hell did this come from? And for some reason, he's getting probably a little bit more. Biden hurting Biden a little bit more. But we can't waste any votes. We have to make sure we win. And I'm meeting, I don't know if you read, but I'm meeting next week, very soon, with the Libertarians, because largely they have so much of what we have. You know, they're also people of common sense, generally speaking. They have a couple of things that are a little different, but we have to join with them because they get their 3% every year, no matter who's running. And we have to get that 3% because we can't take a chance on Joe Biden winning. He's the worst president in the history of our country by far. We can't have it. But RFK Jr. says bad things. He calls you a terrorist group, and I call you the backbone of America. That's a big difference, wouldn't you say?
I'm not going to take anybody's guns away. My father was killed by guns. My uncle was killed by guns. I understand how generationally that gun violence can harm societies or communities. And I also understand there's more in this country and it's intolerable. School shootings are unacceptable. Mass shootings are unacceptable. We're having them every 21 hours, and that is unacceptable. Is it because of the proliferation of guns? The evidence indicates otherwise. And let me explain this. The proportion of guns per home in this country has not increased. I think it's increased by a little less than 1% since 1970. And yet the mass shootings have proliferated beyond, started since then, and now, you know, they're everywhere. There are other countries that have comparable numbers of guns. Switzerland, for example, the last mass shooting in Switzerland was 21 years ago. We're having mass shootings every 21 hours. Why is that? It can't be just because of the guns. It has to be something else. I've made a suggestion that we begin studying the other possible covariables. And this is what NIH should be doing. NIH should be studying, are video games contributing to that? There's social media, are the isolation, the alienation that people, could it have something to do with the proliferation of psychiatric drugs, particularly SSRIs?
But your position is that you have a view of the facts, or you believe empirically that limiting gun access wouldn't solve the problem, and therefore you don't want to limit gun access. I guess even before we go into all the comparative studies, what is the great concern? Is it a legal or constitutional concern? I mean, what is the great harm of trying to limit some of the gun access?
Well, you know, right now we're in a part of history, as I said, where we're more polarized than ever. You know, I grew up in Virginia. I spent 2 years living in rural Alabama, another year living in rural South Dakota, and I understand that there are large communities in this country and cultures in this country that feel a cultural attachment to their guns. They see that it's part of the Constitution.
So for you, it's partly how people feel about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
I should mention many countries that have tighter gun access have far lower fatalities, have almost no mass shootings. And the United States has 4 times Switzerland per capita.
Okay,
we have more guns, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I mean, listen, Harry. You know, if we talk sort of non-politically here, something happened that, you know, around the time of Columbine, where these mass shootings started happening. There's never been a time when I was a kid, we had gun clubs in our schools. People brought their guns. Kids brought 22 rifles to school. They weren't walking into classrooms and shooting people. Something changed. There has never been a time in human history where people walked into crowds of strangers and started killing them. Oh, you can't blame it completely on guns because the gun, you know, at the time the mass shootings increased, there was no coterminous increase in gun ownership. It has to be something else beside that. Clearly, the enormous number of guns we have in this country contributes to gun violence. But if we cut the guns, would it end the gun violence? First of all, I don't think, you know, particularly with the very expansionist interpretation of the Second Amendment that the Supreme Court has given, there's very little room.
That's certainly the legal reality.
We do it on the margins, and that's not going to change anything. But what it will do is it will increase the insecurity, the anger, the distrust, the suspicion of those people who feel very strongly about that issue. Yeah. And so for me, it does not seem like I've made the commitment. I'm not going to take people's guns.
I'm skeptical of the Democratic Party. I'm skeptical of the historical establishment wing of the Republican Party. I know you all heard from RFK Jr. earlier today. And I'm just going to be calling it out like I see it across the board, 360 degrees here. I respect his commitment to medical freedom, something that many of you in this room share as well. I will first acknowledge that. Got to respect somebody who stands for actual medical freedom. But RFK Jr. is in no sense a libertarian in any meaningful sense of the word. I mean, the fact is, you cannot say you support free speech in this country if you also have, even in the past, advocating for imprisoning those who have spread climate disinformation. The Second Amendment is not a recommendation, it is a right. And I'm going to say this, call it like it is. I'm proud to be not only the only Republican candidate who came to PorcFest this year, but also to be the only presidential candidate of any party that did not require people to disabuse themselves of their Second Amendment rights in order to enter those grounds either. And I don't think that you're a libertarian if you behave like the other side. I'm glad he's skeptical of the government narrative on vaccines, but he's completely imbibing the government narrative on climate change. I'm glad that he supports actual medical independence, but the fact of the matter is somebody cannot oppose nuclear energy in this country and support an expansion of the regulatory state on grounds of environmentalism or consumer protection and in any way pose as a libertarian. It's just a fact of the matter. So I don't really bend the knee to one particular political party or another. Democrat Party, Republican Party. I respect some elements of what everybody has to say in respecting freedom, but RFK is in no sense a libertarian either.
Well, let me ask you, there's another block that's there that's on all 50 state ballots, so that's the Libertarian Party. Now, they recently had a chance to hear from Donald Trump. You might have heard that one. That one got pretty nasty. I want you to respond to this.
If you want to win, if you want to lose, don't do that. Keep getting your 3% every 4 years. Now I think you should nominate me or at least vote for me, and we should win together.
All right, it was a pretty nasty reception. I don't know how they react to you. I know there are many who are saying well, it's an easy way for you to get in all 50 states, but you're not exactly the classic definition of a libertarian. So what do you do?
Well, I spoke to libertarians the night before, and I got a standing ovation from them. You know, the libertarians, I'm very aligned with libertarians on several issues, on the war issues, anti-war, on the constitutional issues, on personal freedoms, those areas, and on free market capitalism. So on those areas, I'm aligned with libertarians. There's other issues like the abolition of Social Security and Medicare in which, you know, I differ from them.
Apparently, it was the Social Security thing
so-
that knocked you off their list. But Donald Trump does have a point to say, unless they, put their arms around somebody, they are going to get 2 or 3% every 4 years. So what good is that? What do you think of that?
Well, that's up to the libertarians. I mean, I'm polling now pretty consistently in the real polls where they ask the polling question the way it's going to end up on the ballot. I'm polling at 15% or above. We're very happy where we are right now. I have 5 months and 4 days to persuade Americans that they should be voting out of hope and inspiration rather than out of fear. My favorability rating is better than either President Biden or President Trump. I'm beating them consistently in young people in this country, and I'm beating them among independent voters who are today the biggest voting cohort today. For the first time in history, independent, self-identified independents outnumber both Democrats and Republicans. 43% identify as independents, only 27% Democrats, 27% Republicans. So in that cohort, I dominate. Our challenge is getting to the baby boomers. And, at this point, the television networks won't let me on except for Fox. But the major networks will not let me on to do a live interview like you're doing right now. And I think that is the big obstacle to us. And if we can break down that barrier, we're pretty confident that we'll do well with the baby boomers as well.
Former Trump policy aide Steve Miller, also Trump campaign surrogate, dear friend. Steve, look, this is not personal. I know Robert Kennedy Jr., and he's a very gracious person, not personal. But on the issues, I want to begin with this. He has a long history of being a real climate extremist, it seems to me. And I think that's a big problem. And I think under the Biden administration, I don't know whether there's much difference between the two. We've seen how this has damaged the economy, oil prices, gasoline prices, business expenses. What do you make of all that?
Well, you're right. RFK Jr. is a climate extremist, has been for many years. His climate extremism is well documented and well known. He would shut down all fossil fuels. He would abolish drilling, and he would put significant taxes on carbon emissions that would crush the economy. I think what's significant, Larry, and what you're really talking about today is this. He is indeed a serious candidate. He is a serious candidate of the left. The American voters will go to the polls, and they'll be able to choose from 2 liberal Democrat politicians, RFK and Biden. Some Democrat voters might like RFK's climate extremism and vote for him. And so you have 2 extremely liberal candidates in Biden and RFK running. By the way, it's not just climate extremism. RFK has been very extreme on the Second Amendment in favor of gun confiscation. He's been very extreme in favor of socialist economic and tax and regulatory policies. He's been very extreme, even recently, saying that he favors abortion up through the end of pregnancy in all 50 states. So again, a very, very far left position there. So on issue after issue, he staked out territory that puts him to the leftmost portion of the American electorate.
I'm reading from Karl Rove's column on this. Karl's pretty tough on him. Again, this is not personal. He's a very gracious man. But Karl says Kennedy has a lot of other, quote unquote, moonbat ideas. Agribusiness is waging war on our health through the food pyramid. The 2004 election was stolen. Wi-Fi and 5G cause cancer. Sirhan didn't kill RFK Sr. He also talks about reparations for black descendants or cities. He doesn't mention any specific names. So, again, these are pretty far out stuff. These are pretty far left. Actually, they're just fringe kinds of issues. Those don't really seem serious to me.
Well, another one that was not included on that list is his very, very strong sympathy for the Palestinians that support Hamas. So that's another issue where he fits in very well with the left flank of the Democrat Party. I think there's a lot of, for example, Arab voters in Michigan who don't like Biden and who will be voting for RFK. I think there's a lot of college students in places like New Hampshire who are very anti-Israel, who will be very comfortable voting for RFK. So there's a large portion of Biden's coalition that will actually be much more comfortable, whether it be on climate issues or foreign policy issues, voting for RFK. So this is squarely a problem as and more and more people become familiar with his record. And so there's a lot of it was in Mr. Rowe's column, a lot of what we've discussed today. I think it's going to be a real scare for Democrats in November.
Yeah, I mean, the issue of reparations, I've never understood how you get there. I mean, it was hundreds of years ago. Times have changed. It kind of we don't live in Jim Crow anymore. Joe Biden makes the same
reparations
case.
Is unpopular across the board.
I know.
As a policy matter.
I mean, you get Gavin Newsom in California talking about reparations. You're talking about hundreds of billions, maybe over trillions of dollars that nobody has. Doesn't make any sense to me. And again, he's a very nice fella. He's a very gracious man. I've known him for a long time. We had dinner together with a bunch of people maybe a month or two ago. But politically, you're right. He is a man of the left.
Fundamentally, he's a liberal, socialist, Democrat, and more people are becoming familiar with his record.
Thank you, Steve Miller. Appreciate it, buddy. See you soon.
Thank you.
All right, folks.
And I want to go to a report by the Wall Street Journal. They reported yesterday that Trump and Elon are in regular communication. There were rumors today that Elon's advising Trump on crypto, which Elon refuted. And Trump has floated the prospect of giving Elon some sort of advisory role at the White House. What do you make of this, and would you consider Elon for a similar role?
I mean, I already get advice from Elon. So, I value his advice. I think he has a unique perspective. I have an enormous admiration for him. He's been the leader in our country for standing up for free speech. He told me one time, he said that, he said, I'm from South Africa. I was born in South Africa, but this is my country. He said, I don't own any property out of this country. He said, all my properties, all my factories are here in the United States. And I've made a commitment to this country. And he talked about the reason for that was because of our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and our free speech. He stood up for free speech despite it costing him tens of billions of dollars. Nobody else has made that kind of sacrifice since the American Revolution for free speech. And so, I have, Elon's got issues like everybody else, but at his core, I see somebody who's really heroic. Do I worry that he's advising President Trump from, my own personal political point of view? No, I don't. I think it's a good thing. I think the more people who are committed to freedom and values that President Trump takes advice from, or President Biden, if he was advising President Biden, I'd applaud that too.
Trump has left the building.
We can now project the winner of the presidential race. Donald Trump wins the presidency.
What started off as unlikely, impossible, is now reality.
I will fight for you with every breath in my body, and I will never, ever let you down.
We have a president who actually fulfilled the promises he made during the campaign, securing the border to foreign policy.
He now has a record as president that's pretty damn impressive. Breaking news out of Palm Beach,
The FBI has executed an unprecedented search warrant at President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. The former president has both sides of the political aisle up in arms.
It is a dangerous and unstable moment in American history.
The Justice Department has just indicted former President Donald Trump.
For 7 years, they hated him, they targeted him, they hunted him.
This is the epitome of the abuse of the prosecutorial power to preempt political decisions.
I never thought anything like this could happen in America. The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it. The more that a broken system tells you that you're wrong, the more certain you should be that you must keep pushing ahead. They want to take away my freedom because I will never let them take away your freedom. They want to silence me because I will never let them silence you.
They're not coming after me, they're coming after you, and I just happen to be standing in their way, and I will never be moving. On November 5th, 2024, justice will be done. We will take back our country, and we will make America great again. America will always rise to every challenge and overcome every danger.
Donald Trump seems to always get stronger when challenged. These types of things, I think, give him strength.
When I'm reelected, I will totally obliterate the deep state.
As long as we have pride in our beliefs, courage in our convictions, and faith in our God, then we will not fail.
Donald Trump has said more about you. He's zinged you a few times. You don't tend to zing back, and I just wonder why.
I said when I announced my candidacy a year ago that I'm not going to feed into the vitriol and the anger. We have this toxic polarization in our country that to me is more toxic than at any time since the American Civil War. And I think we have to figure out what I said. I'm going to try to identify the values that Americans hold in common rather than focus on mainly these culture war issues that keep us all apart, that are orchestrated to make us hate each other. And I think somebody has to try to bridge the gap between Americans, and that's what I've been trying to do with my campaign. So, I criticize President Trump for his policies, for running up the debt, for getting us in wars, for shutting the country down during COVID, for being friendly to all these big corporations and billionaires. And I don't go after him on personal issues. I try not to talk about his court cases, and I do the same thing with President Biden.
No.
Let's talk about issues. Let's talk about them in a respectful, congenial way, and then let people decide on that basis rather than trying to make us all hate each other. I believe 2024 is going to go down in history as the year an independent candidate wins the presidency. Let me tell you why I think that, because you definitely won't hear about it from the mainstream media. Zogby Strategies recently conducted the most comprehensive and accurate poll of this election, surveying over 26,000 people. That's about 10 times what the typical poll surveys, and it has a margin of error of almost zero. They asked some questions that no one has asked so far. Zogby asked who people would choose in a head-to-head matchup, not just between President Biden and President Trump, but with Kennedy versus Biden and Kennedy versus Trump. Results were shocking to the mainstream media, which is probably why you haven't heard of them. When I go head-to-head with President Biden, I win in a landslide, 367 electoral votes to a mere 171. When I go head-to-head with President Trump, I still win, but in a nail-biter, 270 to 268. And when they face off against each other, President Trump wins by a comfortable margin of 50, whether I'm in the race or not. Frankly, the biggest obstacle to my victory is that people think I can't win. This poll shows that I can, and that's why it's so important to spread the word about these results. They shouldn't be surprising, really. Independents now outnumber Democrats and Republicans by a margin of almost 2-1, and my favorability rating is higher than either of the other candidates. That's why I'm asking for your help today, to turn my winning chances into a winning reality. Please give whatever you can to my campaign. Help me take our country back from the corrupt two-party system that has turned our country into ruin. The election is only months away. Please give me your support now. Thank you, and God bless you.
Hey everybody, my name is Jonathan Hiller and I'm the Director of Content at Team Kennedy, and today we're going to be talking about something that might just be the worst example of voter suppression in our democracy today. And you may not have heard of it. It's extreme restrictions to ballot access. In George Washington's farewell address, America's first and only independent president warned that the rise of political parties would eventually subvert the power of the people. And unfortunately, today, the extreme ballot access laws in our country prove the enduring truth of Washington's words. But let's back up a little bit. So typically, when you go into a voting booth, you see two options, a Democrat and a Republican. But every now and then, you'll see another option. It might be the Green Party or the Libertarian Party or an independent.
Live or die, survive or perish. From this day on, I am with my country.
Bobby is running for president to break the two-party system for good and unify the country. And to do that, he needs to get on the ballot as an independent. And to do that, he needs to get signatures. A lot of them. In fact, we need to gather over 1.5 million signatures throughout the country to make sure that he's on the ballot in every state and the District of Columbia. The amount of signatures that Trump and Biden need is 0. But we're totally fine with that because Team Kennedy has now gathered enough signatures to qualify Bobby for over 200 electoral votes. Recently, Bobby and Nicole turned in over 245,000 signatures to gain ballot access in Texas, which accounts for 40 electoral votes. Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s move to independence has been the most successful in over 30 years. But for shits and giggles, let's observe just how ridiculous this is.
Oh, girl, baby girl.
The weight of the ballot access form needs to be just right in Massachusetts. The petition sheet in Michigan has margins that are so narrow that you have to have them professionally printed. Some states like double-sided, some states like single. And be sure you use the correct color ink and paper, because that's all different too. And in states like Washington, you need to post legal ads at least 10 days before you start petitioning. Also, the range of signatures that you need from state to state are kind of crazy. I mean, it goes from 275 in some states to 219,000 in others. So when it comes down to it, ballot access is all about power. It's the major way that the duopoly tries to make sure that you only have two choices in November. But despite the establishment's efforts to keep Bobby off the ballot, we have hundreds of thousands of volunteers out there gathering signatures all over the country for Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. will be on the 2024 presidential ballot.
He has met ballot qualifications in yet another state.
Here in Michigan, in Iowa,
In North Carolina.
in Arizona and Georgia,
Texas. California.
New York,
Utah.
in Nebraska.
Over 40% of registered voters have now also declared their independence from the two-party system. And thanks to our incredible volunteers and staff, Bobby will be an independent choice for every registered voter in this country in 2024.
I know you filed this complaint with the Federal Elections Commission. What do you think is behind this decision? Do you think it's driven by the Biden camp, the Trump camp, both camps, CNN? What?
The rules are that networks can sponsor debates, but they cannot pre-select. They have to use pre-selected criteria in order to decide who gets to participate in those debates, and it has to be objective, neutral criteria. And what happened, according to the people who participated in that conversation, as reported by the Washington Post, is that the Biden administration said to CNN, you need to select rules that will keep Robert Kennedy off the stage, or we're not going to participate. If you have criteria that you design to garner two candidates, then that's an illegal, and to exclude everybody else, and that is an illegal campaign contribution to those candidates. And so we've written a complaint to FEC asking them to enforce the rules. We talked with CNN, and CNN was very cagey about exactly what happened in that conversation. We asked them, did you pre-select? Did you select it in response? Did you select your criteria in response to what the Biden administration asked you to do? And they said, we can't answer that question because it's privilege. Well, there is no privilege that applies to that conversation. So they were being dishonest about that.
Do you think that there's one candidate that's more against you being there, obviously because they think you're going to hurt their chances more?
Both candidates wanted me off the stage, but since the announcement, President Trump has come out publicly and said that he would welcome me on the stage, as long as I meet the criteria, which I do. The President Biden's staff has said they do not want me on the stage and that they will not participate if I am on the stage. So I would say the answer to that question is that President Biden doesn't want me on. The polls, the best polls, show that I take many more votes away from President Trump than I do from President Biden. So, when we poll our own followers, about 57% of them say that if I'm not in the race, that they're going to support President Trump. If I'm in the race with President Trump and President Biden, President Trump wins. If I get out of the race, President Trump wins larger. He actually gets 2 more states, Virginia and Maine. If in a head-to-head race between me and President Trump, I beat President Trump. President Biden cannot beat President Trump. I can. In a head-to-head race between me and President Biden, I win 39 states. He only wins 11.
I know that RFK Jr. wants to try and get onto the stage on Thursday, and I'd love to have him, frankly, because I don't think he's much of a debater. And he's got some very liberal, radical left ideas. But I would love to have him, but you have to get certain numbers. That was the criteria, and he's way below those numbers. He's not coming close. So I hope to see him up there someday, but it looks to me like he's not going to qualify on many fronts. But he'll be there, and, they say he hurts Biden more than he hurts me. I don't know if that's true or not, but they say he hurts Biden because he's a serious left person. And you know what? If he is, that's good. I don't really care. I'm going to Cleveland. It looks like we're doing great in Ohio. We're doing great in just about every state we're in. Every poll number that's coming in is looking good. We're leading just about every poll on a national basis, also on a swing state basis. And I look forward to Thursday night. It'll be great. And again, I saw RFK Jr., nice guy. I hope he can debate because I really think it would be a good thing to have him up there. I'd love to have him up there, but you have to do better than 6 or 7 points, like by about triple. And maybe someday he'll be there, but I sort of doubt it. Thank you. So we got this poll last night from Rasmussen, and it was they also did it like with Kennedy and with the other ones in there. Cornel West. He's one of my favorite candidates, Cornel West. And I like her also, Jill Stein. I like her very much. You know why? She takes 100% from them. He takes 100%. Kennedy's probably 50-50, but he's a fake. He's a fake. He's a total fake. You don't want to. He's more liberal than Joe Biden and all of these communists that work for him. Kennedy's more liberal than all of them. He wants to be in the debate, but he's got bad numbers. You can't do that, right? I'd like to have him in the debate, actually. I'd love to have him in the debate, but he's got bad numbers, very bad. No, I don't think he's going to ever make it.
I watched your show with President Trump. It was really good. The best I've ever seen him presenting himself. I think you brought out the best in him.
That was my plan. Do you think President Biden is going to be the candidate for the Democrats?
I don't know. I think it's hard to imagine, but I think...
if they don't run him, who will they run?
I don't know. I stopped predicting the future in 2016 when President Trump won because I didn't think that was going to happen. And I just thought, okay, I'm not good at this. So I stopped.
Yeah, well, reading people the way I do, because it's my profession, I predicted with total confidence that he had the message, but he was not the messenger. I said, 100% he won't be elected. And I said, you count on it. I know these things, trust me. I was 100% wrong.
Yeah, my daughter, I have a daughter who never thinks about politics. Like, she has nothing to do with it. And she came to me at the beginning of 2016. And she said, Donald Trump's going to be the next president. And I said, you're crazy. You don't know anything. But
on the off chance that you're not elected in November, and that Donald Trump is elected, would you be willing to work for him in some capacity to do what you're talking about?
I don't think so. I mean, I would listen to a proposal, but I don't think so. I don't think.
You wouldn't serve your country?
Well, I'm not confident that I could do that. If I had that confidence, I would. I think. I don't think. Anyway.
What you've been talking about. I mean, the backstory, because we don't have the time, but we're talking about America. And when I interviewed your cousin Caroline Kennedy, at one point we were talking about how your uncle Teddy would exhort you cousins to memorize Longfellow's poem Paul Revere's Ride, and it reminded me of a different America. You know, because when people talk about, say, I'm a Kennedy Democrat, that's pretty dramatically different than what the party has become. There was a love of country, and I think that when you talk about your uncle's desire, your father's desire to right these wrongs, there's something noble about that, and it's hard not to admire that. And to think that we're 6 decades along and that we're still dealing with this stuff. Most Americans still aren't awake to the narrative. I mean, you know, you're giving us chapter and verse on where the bullets were, and most Americans think, oh, Sirhan, you know, Lee Harvey, you know, and again, not that that's the most important thing, but it points to the deeper truth that we're supposed to be a self-governing people, and it seems that some of the forces that you've been working against have been. They're taking great pains to demonize anybody like you that would question the narrative, and so it seems to me that you have to have hope that people are waking up. I mean, did the 51 people who signed that document denouncing the Hunter Biden laptop as Russian disinformation? I mean, I think that there are many Americans that are aware that something very nasty is going on, that we've got to do something about it. And I just think that whether you are in the White House or outside of the White House, that you know, you're uniquely appointed to be working for this. So I'd like to think that America would mean enough to you that.
You know, I would, first of all.
And by the way, if Biden should win, I don't think you're getting a call from him, by the way.
Yeah. No, I'm not. But I do want to just emphasize what you just said about those people here may not know what you're talking about. I think most of them do, but there were 51 high-level acting or inactive CIA officials who signed a letter saying that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, which was a lie. It was tampering with the U.S. election, what they were doing. And it was the CIA tampering with the U.S. election. And the fact that, you know, I mean, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump's, and one of the reasons that I don't think I'd go to work for him is because he offered me a job in the last administration, and then he took $1 million from Pfizer, and then.
I mean, I've heard that story, and I think a lot of us were in a different place at that time. A lot of us have a very different view of Pfizer and Moderna than we did at that point, and actually a very different view of many things than we did at that point.
When somebody looks you in the eye and tells you, I want you to do this, and then, you know, it was a big cost for me to go announce that I'm joining the Trump administration, an enormous cost. And then, you know, and then nothing is there. It makes you less willing to, you know, then entrust to trust that person again. So, you know, like I said, I would listen to a proposal. My objective is to help my country.